Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Thursday. It's almost Friday, but we have a lot of content to cover today. A lot of different topics, and I'm sure as you guys have all seen on social media, what you've seen on the premium message boards, we're going to kick off today's show starting with discussing the departure of the running backs coach, Deland McCullough. And from there, we are going to go through and dive into the quarterback battle. And that's something that's been anticipated, something that has been a hot topic of conversation between buy-sell holds and mailbags all throughout the offseason. Really, since the end of the night of January 20th, that has been a hot topic of discussion. Talking about mailbags here, what we're going to kind of do today, guys, is we're going to play it by ear a little bit. We just got off of a 5-hour-long buy-sell hold yesterday. We have a full Friday free-for-all mailbag on Friday. So if there's super chats that come in, we'll always get to those at the end of the show. But there's a lot of good content to cover today, guys, between what is going to happen with the replacement of Deland McCullough and what that move was about. And then obviously we're going to spend a lot of time breaking down this quarterback battle that's going to be happening, that's really already started up until we find out who the starter is and who's going to trot out there under center game one on August 31st. So with that being said, the mailbag for now, I know we're trying to do more of a mailbag for a certain amount of time at the end of shows, but with how the last couple of days have gone, with how much stuff we have to cover today, we're going to play that by ear just as a heads up. But before we get into that, Bryan.
Still get those questions in just in case. But yeah. Somebody
Bryan,
just said they signed up for a 5-hour massage just to watch IB. So he was expecting another long one today. I'm good, man. I'm good. Still working on kicking this cough. Feel a little bit better today, but obviously long night last night with everything kind of going down. You hear about Coach McCullough late. I put an intel piece on the board today. If you want to check, if you want to kind of know the behind the scenes, kind of what happened, how it went down, how the Raiders initiated the conversation and the back and forth that they had, the reasons why Coach McCullough left. And there's this notion that, well, he was going to leave. He was looking to leave. No, he wasn't. And I have some intel on there talking to somebody very close to the situation about it. So you can check that out. You can check that out on the message board. But, yeah, it was kind of like we were just dead set on, okay, quarterback talk tomorrow, man. That's it. And then, of course, you get the news last night, and it's just another gut punch, right? I mean, it was another it's just another gut punch. I know we'll jump into it again, but busy day, man. Very busy day. It's like, I was talking to Sean last night. I said, what kind of offseason would it be at Notre Dame if it wasn't like filled with drama? I just don't know that we've seen that at Notre Dame. It's like the only time we ever see like no drama is like after a year that sucked or was disappointing. It's like no changes. Everybody comes back. Nobody gets fired. It's it's a battle, but I'm ready to rock and roll. That's what happens to good teams. That's what happens to good teams. I keep kind of jumping ahead of you, but yeah, how are you doing today, Trev? You ready to? I know you're always ready to go, man. You're young, you're spry, you're newlywed. You're always ready to go.
We're ready to dive into it today, man. And we've been talking about it a lot, but that's where we're going to start today is we're going to have just a discussion around Deland McCullough's departure and his decision to head back to the NFL and join Pete Carroll and the new staff of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's actually joining their new offensive coordinator and Chip Kelly, who just a couple of days ago announced that he was going to the Las Vegas Raiders as well. So they're going through and rebuilding a whole new staff there. But yeah, I mean, Bryan, you said it best. It's a little bit of a gut punch, man. And when the news broke last night, you and I sat down and we talked on the phone, and it was one of those that with all of the other drama that's happened this offseason, right? With Al Golden departing, Chad Bowden departing, the hire of Chris Ash, the discussions around all of that, I honestly kind of not forgot about Deland McCullough, but forgot that he is one of the potential coaches based on performance that was going to get some other looks. Naturally, Notre Dame had a great season. Notre Dame has had a really good running back room the last 3 years. That's been spearheaded by Coach Deland McCullough. So, where we start is just what does this mean for Notre Dame, and what does this mean for them moving forward, Bryan?
Well, welcome to the new normal. I mean, that's really the way that it is. When you're this kind of team, you're going to lose players. You're going to lose guys in the NFL draft. You're going to lose coaches. I mean, if Notre Dame was 7-5 this year and defense was just kind of mediocre and the running backs fumbled the ball every other game and and weren't good in pass pro and weren't making big plays, we'd be sitting here loving life about how Al Golden and Deland McCullough are not coming back. Actually, we may not be loving life because we'd be complaining about the bad job they did coaching, right? I mean, that's what we'd be doing. When you do a great job, you're going to have other people say, hey, I want what they're doing. What's the best way to do that? Go get their assistant coaches. And look, I can assure you this is going to be something for the next month that we're just going to have to accept as something to be concerned about, because there's NFL teams coming after Mike Mickens. There was a report that I think it was Football Scoop put it out that Mike Brown turned down the Cleveland Browns job. People are going to keep coming. Joe Rudolph interviewed for the Bears job. That's just the way that it is. And to a degree, you kind of, it's not fun. It stinks just without any context. It stinks to lose Al Golden. It stinks to lose Deland McCullough. It stinks to lose Chad Bowden. But it's like, but why? Why did USC pay all that money to get Chad Bowden? Because he'd done a great job and this team was real successful. Why did they come get Al Golden? It's not because he has NFL experience. It's that he has NFL experience and showed that he's an elite defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And why did the Las Vegas Raiders, who have a major turnaround in front of them, why did Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly immediately push for Deland McCullough? Because of the success Notre Dame had, which was driven by the great job he did recruiting and then obviously coaching that room. They don't care about the recruiting part. He doesn't have to do any recruiting with the Raiders. But, I mean, you do a little bit of free agent recruiting, but it's the coaching piece that was outstanding. And so when you're doing that kind of job, you're going to have coaches getting poached. And we've shared some thoughts about the replacement for Al Golden, but at the same time, you almost have to say, hey, who hired those guys? Who hired Al Golden? It was Marcus Freeman. Who hired Chad Bowden? It was Marcus Freeman. Who hired Deland McCullough? It was Marcus Freeman. So, he did a good job replacing them. You have to have a little bit of hope and faith that he's going to do the same thing. We'll provide our honest analysis of who he does, in fact, hire. And if we don't like it, we'll talk about it. But at the same time, there's going to be a level of, like, there's this notion that you have to have faith in Marcus Freeman, and that means you can't criticize his decisions. My thing is, no, I'll give you an honest opinion of a hire he makes, and if I don't like it, I'll tell you I like it, but still have a little bit of faith in him that, like, listen, this is how I feel based on what I know, but I'm not going to go jump off of a bridge because he's made some hires before that I didn't necessarily like. Not many. I mean, and the reasons I didn't like Al Golden I didn't dislike Al Golden. I liked Al Golden, but I had some concerns about the transition is different than Chris Ash, but there still was let's see how it plays out, because I think Marcus Freeman has kind of earned that track record in two regards. One, he has shown that he can make good hires. And two, if he doesn't make a good hire, he's been relatively quick to move on from it. And I think that's the mark of a coach that understands the importance of having a big-time staff around him, and I hope that continues. And so that's sort of the saving grace. But the other part of it, too, is Deland McCullough did a great job recruiting at Notre Dame, and you're going to have a room in there that's going to be talented, which I know we'll dive into, but that's just the reality of it. And, Trevor, you're going to see more coaches leaving for the NFL, not just at Notre Dame, but in general, because the NFL's paying better for assistant coaches. And there's more and more coaches, especially veterans, that are just like, I don't want to deal with the nonsense that's going on right now. In the NFL, when we sign a guy to a 3-year contract, you expect him to kind of be there for 3 years if he's a big-time player. I know guys get cut and things like that, but the reality is you draft a guy, as long as he's not a complete waste, you got him for 3 years or 4 years. And if he's a first-round draft pick, you can keep him for 5. So that's my guy for the next minimum 4 years, as long as he just does what he needs to do. And it's just the insane aspects of college football nowadays, just the greediness of – how am I talking about the greediness of the players? I'm talking about the greediness of parents, but even beyond that, the greediness of all these agents and lawyers that are involved in it with no streamlining and no process to make sure that players aren't getting screwed over and all this kind of stuff. And, you got to re-recruit your entire room every offseason. It's just like, why go through this hassle? No, then I got to be on the road for 3 months during the offseason recruiting. Why do that when I can go coach in the NFL and be there and not have to go on the road? Let me do a little bit of going to this pro day of these 2 backs that we like and that kind of thing. But it's just a different animal. And with the NFL paying their assistant coaches better, the Raiders paid Chip Kelly, what did I see? It's like $6 million.
Yeah.
Deland McCullough was, I think, the third, in the top 5-ish in running back payment at Notre Dame. He was making, I think, $750,000. He got a significant pay raise. I can assure you of that. That's just one of those things where you look at it and say, the NFL is coming for all of the college football's top coaches who don't want to deal with that stuff anymore. And if the NCAA and college football doesn't figure out a way to fix this problem, this is going to keep happening. And fixing the problem doesn't mean not paying players. I'm not even like, well, the genie's out of the bottle. No, that should have been happening as far as the NIL and different aspects of it. But if you don't end the madness, you're going to keep losing really good coaches, and your product's going to be hurt. So those are all things that I look at, Trevor, and say, hey, this is what you got to get used to if you're Notre Dame. As long as Notre Dame keeps winning, and as long as Marcus Freeman keeps making good hires, you're going to lose coaches. They were not going to have this year's coaching staff for the next 10 years. You'd be lucky to get it for another one, and obviously you're not going to. Now, they've only lost 2 coaches out of 10, but those are 2 really good coaches. I mean, you lost 2 of 2 guys that you could argue are among the best of the best, and it's not a given that the rest of the staff is going to stay intact. But it's certainly a loss. It's certainly a loss. Just without any context of what comes next or whatever, you don't just lose a guy like Deland McCullough and say, no big deal, they'll just hire somebody else. Because he's not just a great coach, he's a tremendous mentor. I mean, we've talked before about on the recruiting trail, Trev, where 2 dads who knew each other of running backs in the same class challenged him in that he didn't know about it, where they basically asked him certain questions, both dads, during visits and conversations, and they wanted to see if he was being honest to both of them. And then when they called and compared notes, they're like, yeah, he told us the exact same thing he told you, meaning not like he told my kid he was number 1 and he told your kid he's number 1, but it was more like, and I don't know if this is exactly what it was, but like he told my kid that he's number 1 and he told your kid that my kid is number 1, that kind of thing. And again, I don't know if that was the specifics of it, but he didn't have one message for one kid and family. He didn't have a different message for another kid in another family. He gave a very consistent message. And that's when both parents were like, we can trust that guy. Now, one of those kids committed to Notre Dame. His name's Jeremiah Love. The other kid went somewhere else. It is what it is. But it wasn't because of any issue with Deland McCullough. So you look at those things, Trev, and you just realize that this is going to be a tough guy to replace. But there are a lot of good football coaches out there. But when you talk about this one, it's you're losing a great coach, you're losing a great recruiter, you're losing a great mentor, and you're losing someone that Marcus Freeman thought highly enough of to make him the associate head coach. So you're losing a leader in that room as well. And no matter what you say about whether you can or can't replace him, you acknowledge, you first, to me, acknowledge the great job he did. You absolutely acknowledge that, and then you move on. And I think that's the first thing we do as Notre Dame fans. We need to sit back and appreciate the phenomenal job he did in 3 years in Notre Dame. I mean, you look at the estimate Logan Diggs combo in 22 with no pass game at all. They combined for over 1,700 yards and what was it, like 15 touchdowns. 2023, you have Audric Estime breaks out as a star, sets a Notre Dame rushing record in touchdowns, has the 5th best all-time season. Come out this year, Jeremiah Love breaks out as a star. Jadarian Price breaks out as a big-time home run weapon. Aeneas Williams steps into the lineup. You're looking at like Kedron Young waiting in the wings kind of thing, and you look at it and you're just like, man, they're just rolling. And part of that is the talent, but why is the talent there? You know, I mean, obviously, and the thing is, he inherited a certain part of that room. He inherited Audric Estime and Logan Diggs, but then he added to it Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and now Nolan James coming in. He did a great job of building on what was established in front of him, but then making sure that he left the job even better than he found it. And that's something that I think we all as fans can tip our caps to and say, hey, Coach, great job. Appreciate you. Wish you all the best. It's hard for me as a a former Broncos fan. I've never rooted for the Raiders a day in my life. But I still hope they go 0-16 or 0-17 or whatever, but the running backs ball out every week. That'll be my thing. I just can't get myself to root for the Raiders. But the point is, Trev, is you thank him for the job he's done. and then you appreciate the standard he has set in that room, which is a very, very high one. And then you say, okay, now it's time to figure out where you go next, because you got a season to play. The other teams you're going to play are going to be like, well, we're going to take it easy on you because we know you lost some good coaches. You got to keep rolling, right? The ship's got to keep steaming ahead.
It's going to be the thing that's going to be interesting moving forward is Notre Dame is going to have to maintain the standard without some key pieces, right? But you always tip your cap to the tremendous coaching jobs that Al Golden did and that Deland McCullough did. And so for me, it's bittersweet, but it's to be expected. I look at this with some of the coaching changes there's always got to be a give or take somewhere, right? If Notre Dame is going to be considered an elite program, it is a Cinderella story type of dream to think that you're just going to have the same coaching staff year over year, right? You look at all the perennial big programs and it's just not going to be the same, but it's tough. It's frustrating, but you wish him the best. I was never really I was never a Denver Broncos fan either. I just have never rooted for the Raiders. You know what I mean? But you always want to see him go and have success. But now the question is who are you going to bring in to continue that line? Like, you have to find the right coach, and you can't ask that coach to be Deland McCullough, but you have to ask him to maintain the high level of standard that the running back room has been at Notre Dame for years. So it's going to be interesting. So when you talk about replacing him, where do you kind of start? Where do you kind of look at, Well,
look, we're all going to have our biases on who we think they should go get, right? Everybody knows my opinion of Tony Alford. I think Tony Alford's a heck of a coach. I think he's one of the best of the best, right? He is he is a guy that did a great job at Ohio State, did a great job at Michigan this past year with their running backs, did a great job at Notre Dame when he was here before. He knows the unique nature of recruiting at a place like Notre Dame. He's also someone who values being a mentor. He's someone who values building people up as human beings. So he's known as a very good running backs coach. So he's a guy. And then obviously I have experience having dealt with him when he was at Notre Dame the first time, when I was covering the team. I got the chance to cover him and know what kind of job he does. But the reality is there are a lot of good running back coaches out there in college and in the NFL. And that's the reality. We're all going to have our preferences. Ryan texted me today, and he was like, hey, I got an interesting name in mind. And I'm like, okay, who's that? And he's talking about Thomas Hammond, right? The running backs or the head coach at Northern Illinois, who was a great running back at Northern Illinois, whose career got cut short because of a heart problem. And obviously he's done a really good job as the head coach there. I believe Thomas Hammock has experience coaching in the NFL during at some point in time too. So, this is a guy that's a mentor. He's a leader. He understands. We've praised him in the job he did, as how tough his kids were and how well coached they were and all those type of things. And yeah, he was with the Baltimore Ravens for 5 years before he took over at Northern Illinois. So yeah, he's a New Jersey guy. He played in the East Coast. He's coached his whole career outside of the Ravens in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota. That's a good name. That's great. There's going to be other people in the chat talking about Tashard Choice. Where is Tashard Choice now? I know he was at Georgia Tech, but where is he now? Sure. I thought he was with the is he with the Cowboys? He played with the Cowboys. Where's he? He's at Texas right now as a coach. So, he's done a really good job there. You think of Jawan Sider at Penn State, who's done an excellent job recruiting and developing players. There's a lot of really good running back coaches out there. There are some guys we don't know a lot about. But the reality is Deland McCullough has built this position into something to where you shoot for the best because you have a room. You're like, listen, look, this is what we've done here. We've recruited elite talent. Jeremiah Love goes into next season as arguably the best running back in college football. And oh, by the way, we're also going to have Jadarian Price, who would start for 90-something% of the teams in college football and be a 1,000-yard rusher. Oh, and by the way, we have two rising sophomores named Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young that when it's their time to take over as the in the backfield, they're going to be dudes as well. And oh yeah, by the way, we also have Jabron Payne coming back, and we just landed Nolan James Jr. And if you look at the running backs that Deland McCullough just went and visited on the recruiting trail, there he got some interest. Now that's going to have to start over from scratch depending on who they hire. unless they hire another college coach from a big school who's recruiting a lot of those guys as well. That's going to be a challenge, but it's still early enough in the process that he did a good enough job sparking the interest that you can then kind of recover and get on track with them. So the you've got this great job there now that you can sell. It's just how aggressive does Marcus Freeman want to go when it comes to paying top dollar for a guy like that? Because he paid top dollar for Deland McCullough because he was established and proven at Notre Dame. Will he want to do that with a coach who hasn't coached here? I'd say yes, if the guy has the track record and the experience to do that. Maybe there's an up-and-coming young coach that he wants to go get. Because here's the other side of that is, so you go out and get this big-time coach, you get a Tashard Choice, or you get a Thomas Hammock, or you get a Tony Alford, and you keep rolling the next year or two. Well, guess what? NFL is going to come calling for those guys. Or, so maybe you go get a really young, talented guy that maybe you think you can keep for a couple extra years. I mean, I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm just saying that's the other thing that Marcus Freeman has to consider. And then, of course, we have to look at people that have relationships with Mike Denbrock. That's also part of the reason I looked at Tony Alford, because him and Mike Denbrock coached together for a long time at Notre Dame. From 2010 until 2014, they coached together, in fact. So that's the other thing to look at it and say that there's a great foundation. What kind of coach are you going to go get? At the end of the day, I don't really care about specific names. I care that Marcus Freeman finds someone that is an established, proven coach to some degree, even if it's a younger guy, but a younger guy that has an established track record to some degree. I think that's vitally important, because you've got to make sure that the running back room next year is coached well. You need someone that has a vision for how to keep the entire room happy. That is so important in today's era, especially with the talent Notre Dame has. Someone who has, and this time something you bring up, it's got to be part of their presentation to you. Hey, look, and that's something that I thought Coach McCullough did a great job of, is like, this is the plan for playing a lot of guys. Everybody's going to have their role, and it kept the room happy. And that's why everybody came back, even though there was a lot of talk about how they were going to lose somebody in the portal. Well, they all came back. Why? Because they bought into Coach McCullough's vision. You now need to resell them on that in the spring, whoever that new coach is. And it was just going to be, hey, we're going to ride the Jeremiah Love train this year because I only have ever, known how to develop one back. Then guess what? You may have Jeremiah for a year, but you might lose a couple guys this offseason. And then when Jeremiah goes pro next year, your running back room is a hot mess. That's got to be part of it. So someone that understands how important it is to develop the entire room. And someone who has recruiting chops is also very important. This is the position that you can recruit at an elite level at Notre Dame, but it's not easy. It's harder, but it can be done with the right guy. I thought Tony Alford did a great job of that. He recruited well during his career. They had some bad luck at times also. I mean, obviously Greg Bryant, his situation, Torian Folston got hurt. Cameron Robinson got hurt. I really liked him when he was coming out. He signed the Josh Adams, Dexter Williams class. That was his parting gift to Notre Dame, was Dexter Williams and Josh Adams, his last class there. So he did some really good things. Oh, and he also recruited Theo Riddick, and Tony Alford also recruited Lewis Nix, by the way. He was the guy that got Lewis Nix to commit to Notre Dame in between, because he was a holdover from the Charlie staff. He actually got hired by Charlie Weiss. And so in that time between Weiss being fired and Kelly being hired, he kept recruiting Lewis Nix, because back then Notre Dame was doing geographical recruiting even more so than they were positional recruiting. So Coach Alford had Florida. So he got Lewis Nix to commit to him when they didn't even have a head coach. That tells you the kind of job that he did recruiting. So you look at it and you say, but is Tony Alford the only guy that could win here? No, but there's a proven track record there as a recruiter. If you're not going to bring him in for Michigan, or if he doesn't want to leave Michigan, the principles still apply, whether it's Tony Alford or Tashard Choice or Jawan Sider or Thomas Hammock or whatever. Really good coach of the game, the X's and O's, the finer points of the position, know how to keep an entire room coached up well and happy, and then you've got to have recruiting chops. So however you go about it, that's got to be the case. And you need to be someone that understands how important it is to be a mentor, because that is something that's vitally important. But also, here's another thing. That's what Deland McCullough was exceptional at. And if you come in here and you're not that way, you will stand out like a sore thumb, and you will have a very hard time connecting with your room if you're not someone who comes in with that same sort of, I got your guys' back. I want what's best for you in life, not just with words, but in action. Then you're gonna struggle. And I cannot believe somebody in the chat just said something about Eric Bieniemy. That would be the hardest no ever. But especially for the reasons I just mentioned. But that's the thing. I care more about the archetype than I do about saying this is my guy. Now, should Marcus Freeman call Tony Alford? You bet your butt he better call Tony Alford. But if it works out to where Tony Alford's not the hire, or Thomas Hammock or whoever else is the perfect choice, for individual people, the reality is whoever he hires has to fit into that criteria. And that's what he should be looking for. And that's what I care more about than pointing to specific names of different guys, because there's a lot of guys we could go with, and there's the hot names and this, that, and the other. But that's the kind of thing he should be shooting for, is that right there. And the reality is, listen, some of those guys are going to be tough to get if we're being completely honest. Look, I would love to be able to get the guy from Penn State, but I don't know that you can afford him. You know what I mean? Like that might be a little tough. And but you make guys like that say no. That's the reality of it. You make them say no, and you stick to the criteria. That's what it comes down to for me.
The nice thing about both of the replacements that Notre Dame is having to make on their coaching staff is they're walking into winning situations, which I think makes the job significantly more attractive to whoever. Like, that is a selling point of the job, right? If you're going to ask somebody to come in and take over something. So if you think about Chris Ash on the defensive side, it's a lot easier to say, hey, come in and just keep this train rolling, not, hey, we need you to come in and rebuild something. You look at the running back room. Hey, man, whoever you hire is getting a loaded arsenal of running backs. Now, the biggest thing that I'm going to look for in Coach Freeman's hires are going to be, is he going to maintain what makes his coaching staff as a whole unique? And that is putting heavy emphasis on the development of young people. That's something that I really love that Marcus Freeman talks about. And that's something that Deland McCullough has done a really, really good job of. The entire running back room sings his praises, right? I mean, when Jeremiah Love went on RG3's podcast, he paid a lot of tribute to Deland McCullough. And he is the person who helped make that room go and who helps make that room work, and they've all bought into each other. So I'm really excited to see who this search is going to be. I could not agree more with your criteria. It's just another one of the wild rides in Notre Dame's offseason, man. So again, we're just kind of waiting in the wings and watching it play out with everybody else. But it's going to be interesting to see where they go with this one.
And I love some of the names. Like, somebody on the board is like, do you call Eddie George? And I'm like, yeah, you call him. I mean, but you have a list ready when he tells you no. But you of course you call him. But I mean, the point is, there's a lot of really good running back coaches out there. You've got to find the guy that fits what works at Notre Dame. And what works at Notre Dame is the things that we just talked about. And so I won't get there's been so many names thrown into the chat, and a lot of them are really good names. And that's the point. There's a lot of good coaches out there. You got to make sure you go get one, and hopefully this one will be a little bit more inspiring than the last hire that was made last week. But different conversation for a different day. But there's a lot of good coaches out there. Find the guy that can coach, find the guy that can evaluate, find the guy that understands how to build up an entire room, find the guy that can recruit, and find the guy that truly understands what coaching college football is all about, which at the end of the day is still number one, about developing young men to be successful in life first and foremost, then develop the football part. Because if you're here's the message for all of you that wanted to get into coaching or are coaching. If you don't agree with what I'm telling you, you're wrong. And here's how I know you're wrong. Because if you develop a confidence from them that you care first and foremost about developing them as young men, they will do anything for you. They will literally run through a wall for you. They will trust you when you talk to them about footwork and hand technique and the importance of blocking at a proper angle and the importance of going to the weight workouts and the importance of doing this and the importance of doing that, because they understand coach has my back. Coach wants what's best for me. He's shown that to me in my life. And if I can trust him with that, I can definitely trust him with what my footwork should be on outside zone. And that's why it's important. And if you have a guy that's like, I don't trust that guy. He's this, he tells me this, but then he doesn't do this. He doesn't care about me as a person. Then you're going to have a much harder time getting some of those kids to buy in to the way you need to, especially in this era of open portal, to be able to keep the room the way you need to have the room. And that's why I think that's so important. And it's Notre Dame. That's what you should stand for. Doesn't mean you can't be hard on them, can't be demanding of them. I promise you, Deland McCullough was a very demanding coach. But, if you're not developing the young man, then you got to find something else to do with your life, in my opinion. But I'm not going to go on a tangent on that today.
Well
the other
said,
thing
Bryan.
is, Mike Denbrock will have a role in this too. That's the unique thing where a coordinator hires just Marcus Freeman. Now, when you talk about position hires, you will take input to some degree from your offensive coordinator. And somebody just asked, who would be on Mike Denbrock's list? Very good question. And I don't have an answer to that one, but that will be part of the process. But at the end of the day, it's Marcus Freeman's decision. And he's got to make the right hire. And then it's up to Pete Bavacqua to say, that's what we got to pay to make this happen. Then that's what we're going to pay to make this happen.
Well, that's going to do it for our conversation around Deland McCullough's departure and his decision to head back to Las Vegas. And you wish him nothing but the best and all the success in the world when he travels back up to the pros. We're going to get ready to move over to a really hot topic of discussion here. It's something that's been ongoing now for the last couple of weeks. But before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Whichever platform you watch us on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And all the different discussions, the one that's going on right now in the chat, the one that's going to be coming up here in our next topic of discussion, all that's going to be happening on the premium message board. So please be sure to check those out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, it's time. It is time to dive into the Notre Dame quarterback battle. And this is an interesting spot. It's a spot that Notre Dame hasn't been in quite some time for a multitude of different reasons that we're going to dive into. But when you look at it, big picture, it's a really big offseason for Notre Dame's quarterback room.
Yeah.
For a bunch of different reasons. So a lot of it, much anticipated. We have been screaming from the rooftops that we want a little bit of continuity in that room. And for the first time in a while, they're not going to the transfer portal to look for a starting quarterback in South Bend. So, Bryan, kick us off, man. Quarterback battle in South Bend 2025.
It's a season of transition, Trevor. And there's the normal transition that happens when you lose a quarterback whose career comes to an end, and then you've got to move on to somebody else. And so obviously there's that. It's a normal transition from one quarterback to the next, the heir apparent. It's a year of transition to where, if we're being honest, there hasn't been a lot of quarterback battles. Like I've said last year, look, if Tyler Buchner outplays Sam Hartman every day, he's going to start. But he's going to have to thoroughly outplay Sam Hartman because they didn't bring Sam Hartman in here to be a backup quarterback. 2022, there wasn't really a battle. I mean, I guess if Drew Pine would have outplayed Tyler Buchner, he would have started, but that was not going to be a real competition. He just wasn't as good as Tyler was. 2021, it was Jack Cohn. It was going to be his job. They gave lip service to a battle. Wasn't a battle. We all knew that, and there's nothing wrong with that because those guys weren't ready to beat him out. And then obviously in 2019 and 2020 and 2019, there wasn't a battle either because Ian Book was going to be the starting quarterback. So you really go back to all the way to 2018 is the last time there was a real quarterback battle. And I don't even know how real that was. Because Brandon Wimbush was going to be the starter to start the season. The question was, how was he going to play? And could Ian Book play well enough in fall camp to make the coaches be comfortable putting him in the lineup if Brandon faltered, which is exactly what they did. They didn't bench Brandon Wimbush after, I think it was the Vanderbilt game, because he wasn't playing well. It was because he wasn't playing well in the system they were asking him to run, but Ian had shown a proficiency that they liked in running that offense, and that's why they made the change. It's the two things together, because if you don't bench one quarterback that you know is really good at least one thing for another quarterback who you don't think can play any better, right? You have a guy that has proven himself to say, hey, look, in practice, and of course in the camping, or was it the Citrus Bowl the year before, that against LSU when he came off the bench, hey, this guy's got some chops to him. He made a start the year before against North Carolina. So there was a level of experience there. But you go all the way back to 2018, the last time Notre Dame had a real quarterback battle. And what I mean by a real quarterback battle, one where we didn't know who the quarterback was going to be. Like I said, 2022, there was a battle, but we all knew it was going to be Buckner unless he was just awful. There was a quote-unquote battle in 2023, but we all knew it was going to be Sam Hartman unless he was just not good or Buckner just played out of his mind. And you know, last year we all knew it was going to be Riley Leonard, no matter how much the coaches said he had to win the job. Like, no, he didn't. Come on. Like, he was starting, and he should have been. We haven't had a real quarterback battle since maybe 2018, maybe. And you could even go back all the way to, really to 2016, to where there was one where we didn't have a pretty good idea of who the starter was going to be on day one of the season. And they didn't, I mean, it was Kaiser and Malik. They rotated series that first game against Texas. Point is, it's been a long time, and that's the transition we're going to, where this is a real, surefire, no doubt about it, quarterback battle with three guys who all have a chance to win the job. We could debate, is it an equal chance? Is this guy going to get more of a push? Is that guy going to get more of a push? But the reality is, the guy that plays the best from now, or actually really from a week ago, when they all got back, started working out again, to the start of the season is going to be the starter. There's no guy that's way up here, and if you're going to beat him out, you got to play way better than he does. That's not the case. That'd be the case if Riley was coming back, but that's not the case now. It's who's going to win the job. And the reality is, Trevor, is, the battle's already started. I mean, it started as soon as the season was over with. Leadership, getting together for workouts, who's putting in the work in the weight room, who's doing what they need to do in the classroom, who's showing leadership in the locker room, those type of things. That started already. And basically everything that they do from here on out is going to be evaluated. Things that the quarterbacks may not even know as part of the evaluation should be part of the evaluation. Who's the most attentive in meetings? Who's the most on time for meetings? Not in a butt-kissing way, but in a preparation way. So-and-so gets there early, gets his notepad out. He starts going over some questions that maybe he might have, some thoughts he might have, some things he was working on in the room. So hey, coach, I was watching this film. I got a couple questions for you. Who's the guy that's the most bought into that? Who's the guy that's putting in the most work in the weight room? Who's the guy that's leading in the weight room? All those things are put into the evaluation of this battle, Trevor. And it's really going to, and the reason it's important is because how the quarterback battle goes is going to not only, obviously is going to determine the direction the offense goes, because they all have different traits. And there's a shift that we're going to talk about here in a minute about some changes that are going to be happening. But even within that, there's going to be some unique changes in different aspects of the offense, depending on who. Like, there's going to be things you do with CJ that you maybe don't do as much of with others. There's going to be things you do with Kenny that you may not do as much of with others. There's things you're going to do with Steve that you may not do as much of with others. There's going to be routes one guy likes better than the other, and then the other guy likes better than the other. All those things are going to factor into it. But there's also the aspect that the heart and soul of your team is going to be developed through this battle. Keeping the locker room unified. And all those type of things are all part of this quarterback battle and the transition that Notre Dame is really making this offseason. And the quarterback, as I've said before, your team is a reflection of your head coach and your quarterback more than anything else, unless you have a very unique personality like a Manti. Then it's a little bit different. And the unique personality combined with a redshirt freshman at quarterback is why Manti became the face of that program, not your quarterback. I've said this before. Why did Notre Dame have a different mindset in 2015 than they did in 2016? Because in 2015, everybody knew who the leader of that team was in the offseason. It was Malik. And then when what happened in 2015 happened and you didn't know who that leader was going to be in 2016, and Malik was the way he was, and then Deshaun was the way he was, and one guy did it the way that the coaches said they wanted a leader to be, and the other guy didn't, but they went with the other guy who didn't, as a starter, fractured the locker room because of the way the process went down. And that's the risk you always run in these situations. And so that's where Notre Dame is, and that's why this matters. Because if you don't do it right, you can end up causing some problems. But if you do it right, you build a even stronger team in the locker room. Your football character becomes even stronger. And then also I think that the fact that they are going with someone they recruited, I think also has benefits. And that's the other part of this transition is they're moving away from the portal and going strictly with, we recruited you all three for a reason. Because and it's now like, look, and players understand, look, we know why Riley got brought in. We know why Sam got brought in. We know why Jack got brought in. But why are they bringing in a portal quarterback now? Steve's a junior. Steve's going to be a senior. Kenny's going to be a junior. CJ's going to be a sophomore. Like, is this just what we're doing now? Is this who we are now? The fact that they're showing commitment, hey, we believe in you guys. We're not going to go to the portal because we believe in you guys, is a statement to the rest of the team too that, hey, guys, these three, these are our leaders. We're bought into them, and I think that also helps with the buy-in that you're getting from the team. Is we're going with the guys that we recruited, we developed, and you're hoping that the era of portal quarterbacks is over. It was good for Notre Dame. They don't go 11-2 in 2021 if Jack Cohn doesn't transfer in. They flat out do not. They do not go 10-3 in 2023 if Sam Hartman doesn't come here. You can talk about how he was disappointing and all these other things you want, and certain parts maybe were, but the reality is if you think the 10-3 season was disappointing, imagine what it would have looked like if you didn't have Sam Hartman, because I promise you it would not have been as good as 10-3. And you are definitely not playing for the national championship in 2024 if you don't go get Riley Leonard or another portal quarterback. But now you're at the point where you don't need to do that anymore, and it's time to go get these guys and show, like, to me, it's you're building continuity. These receivers have now been with these guys for the most part for 2 years, 3 years. You've got guys that were recruited with these guys. I mean, CJ Carr had such a big hand in a lot of these kids on offense being recruited to Notre Dame. You know, Kenny's had a role, Steve had a role in those type of things, but CJ was the leader of that 24 class. He was a big reason why a lot of those 24 guys, and you and I remember, because there was a period of time when Dante Moore basically ended his silent commitment to Notre Dame, and they didn't get Kenny till November. There's a long period of time where CJ Carr was the guy that played a big role in recruiting the 2023 receivers like Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. Well, not Jordan Faison as much, but KK Smith, you know, Braylon James, guys like that. So CJ had a big role in that. And like Steve has done what he's done, the sacrifices he's made for the team. It's now you're sort of saying, hey, we're going with you guys. We trust you guys. And I think that really impacts the locker room in a favorable manner, that the portal days are over because it's not needed anymore. And I think that's the sign of faith that this coaching staff showed in this. And it's exciting to for me, because I do think the talent is there for it. It's time to make that move to where portal was necessary. I supported going and get Riley Leonard, but it's time to move past that and build your own. And that's why I'm really looking forward to this battle. That more than anything else is is probably the first reason that I'm looking forward to this battle. And then, of course, you start looking at, okay, but who's going to be that guy?
You know, the thing that makes this quarterback battle so intriguing for me is, one, Notre Dame now has the opportunity, barring if Steve wins the job and has a Heisman-esque type of season, you're going to have a back-to-back starter in South Bend at quarterback for the first time since Ian Book in 1920. And one thing that I've always said is consistency at the quarterback position is something that I believe is needed. Now, in this day and age, I think it's unrealistic to have a 4-year starter at quarterback, but the one and dones, it's really tough to build any sort of continuity with your team. 2, I'm going to be really interested to see how the coaches handle this. We've seen with other position groups what happens when position battles aren't handled correctly. So Gino Guidugli, Mike Denbrock, Marcus Freeman are going to have interesting roles when it comes to this battle because, Brian, to your point, if it's done incorrectly, that's when locker rooms can start to separate. But if it's done correctly, it unifies the team because they know that they're going with the correct person. So I'm excited. I'm excited to jump into this. It's going to be an ongoing discussion all throughout the offseason. because at the end of the day, we don't know when a quarterback is going to be
Yeah.
named the starter. And I think that's another interesting aspect to this. As much as it would be easy to say, all right, well, after April 12th, we know who the starter is going to be. We might have a good idea, but in a good world, in an ideal world, all three of the quarterbacks ball out in the spring. They all play really well in the spring game, and they go into the summer and the fall camp with a spoil of riches at quarterback, ideally. So for me, it's going to be interesting to watch all of it unfold, Brian. It's going to be really interesting to watch it all unfold.
It is. It is. And the other thing too, Trevor, that's going to be interesting to unfold is the offense is going to look different moving forward. You're not going to see the same offense we saw with Riley Leonard. We're not going to see the same offense we saw with Sam Hartman either, or Tyler Buckner. Three very different quarterbacks to different degrees. And Riley and Tyler were a lot more alike than Sam was, but then Tyler only started 3 games in 2022. And now you look at it and it's you're going to have a different type of kid, but we don't know which type it's going to be. So we're certainly going to see some changes at the position, and who wins the job is going to have a big role in that, Trevor. I mean, and I do believe also that we're starting to see the type of quarterback Mike Denbrock wants. Now, Mike Denbrock did not have any role in recruiting the 3 quarterbacks on the roster, but I'm quite confident in saying that when I look at the type of quarterbacks that he has recruited since he's got here, there's this notion that Mike Denbrock wants a dual threat quarterback. And I think that's true in the sense that all coaches like a guy that can run and scramble and make plays with his legs. But the number one priority that Mike Denbrock wants in a quarterback is the ability to dominate from the pocket. Now, if you have a guy that can dominate from the pocket, that's also athletic and mobile and can avoid pressure and scramble and run like Jaden Daniels, that's phenomenal. I don't think Mike Denbrock would choose otherwise a Desmond Ridder type of player. He wants a more natural passer. But if he gets that kind of guy, he'll develop him and turn him into what they did with Desmond Ridder, which was a high draft pick, a guy that threw for over 3,000 yards. So I think you're going to start to see the transition of what Mike Denbrock wants this offense to look like. And you and I talked about this. He did what he had to do this past year, Trev. Now it's the time to see, okay, but what do you want to do? And if you look at the first 4 games, really the first 5 games, you'll see a lot of things in there that are a lot different than what we saw later in the year. Why? Because early in the year, and I think it was Sean Davis that brought this up to me, but he made the point, he's like, we were talking about just the reasons that I didn't think Denbrock was building the offense the way that it really should around Riley early. And he goes, do you think part of this is Riley Leonard's fault? So, well, what do you mean by his fault? He goes, do you think that was part of the conversation they had when he came in is, hey, coach, I want to develop more as a pocket passer? Well, that's probably a really good point. That probably happened. But then after the bye week, it was like, okay, look, we got to win games. And this is how we're going to win games. I know you better. I know what you – because I was told that Riley Leonard no one's going to be shocked by this, Trevor. He's a bit of a people pleaser. So if – hey, Riley, what do you think about this concept? Oh, coach, I love it, man. I love it. It's good stuff. Well, what do you think about this, Riley? Oh, coach, man, it's good stuff, man. I love it. But then you realize, like, no quarterback loves everything. Every quarterback has things he likes and things he doesn't like. Peyton Manning, John Elway, Tom Brady, Dan Marino, all of them. But Riley would never say what he does and doesn't like. So what Denbrock had to do is he had to evaluate what he does well. And then you eventually saw a shift, but it takes games for that to happen. And then you saw what they kind of turned into. But early in the year, we saw some things from the pass offense schematically that I thought really played a big role in us understanding who Mike Denbrock is. And then when you study what he did at Cincinnati and LSU, you start to see some things that are constants there. And now I think we're going to really start to see what the Mike Denbrock offense looks like.
Yeah, it's exciting. I wrote an article about it, and I think that Notre Dame is poised to have a breakout season as far as passing goes. That's what the trends show us as far as Mike Denbrock's career has gone as an offensive coordinator. You look at what the progression that Desmond Ridder went through, and he was not as much of a prolific passer as what Jaden Daniels was. I think Desmond Ridder benefited a lot from just being in his system for 4 years. And the culmination of that was his 3,000-yard season at the end, But then you look at the jump that Jaden Daniels had, and you look at what he was able to do, and that was something that you got an idea of what Mike Denbrock wanted his offense to be. Now he has 3 guys in a quarterback room that are all battling it out, that all have the ability to push the ball down the field.
Yep. Well, like with Desmond Ridder, to put data to your point, Trevor, his first year as a starter was 2018. He passed for 2,445 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. The next year, 2019, he passes for 2,100 yards and 2164, 18 touchdowns, 9 picks, quarterback rating 123. Third year as a starter. It's a COVID year, so they only played 10 games, but the numbers don't change a whole lot. He passes for 2,296 yards, 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So the numbers don't change a lot, but he started to see the growth. 188 yards per game in his first year, 146 rating, 166.5 yards the second year, 123.7 rating. In his third year, he jumps up to 229.6. Even though, so like again, the 2296 doesn't look a lot different, but when you take the games out, 8.2 yards per completion compared to 6.7 the year before. The interception and touchdowns don't look a lot different, but when you consider 3 less games, he went from 18.9 to 19.6. Completion percentage goes from 55.1 in 19 and 62.4 his first year to 66.2. And then he comes out as last year. He has those for 3,341 yards, 8.6 yards per attempt, 30 touchdowns, 8 picks, and he has a 158.68 quarterback rating, 238 yards per game. And then, as you pointed out, we saw a similar jump with Jaden Daniels, who at LSU averaged 8.3 yards per attempt in only 4 games in 2020. Next year, he throws 10 picks, 10 interceptions at Arizona State, passes for 7.9 yards per attempt, 183 yards per game, comes to LSU that next year. See a little bit of improvement in certain areas. Completion percentage goes up, but yards per attempt goes down because there's a lot of quick stuff. 17 touchdowns, 3 picks, 144.54 rating. Clearly still developing as a quarterback. He was still a guy that wanted to throw short and wasn't comfortable with timing and different things like that. He knew he had the tools, but the tools hadn't been brought out. And then, of course, in year 2 under Mike Denbrock, he has a legendary Heisman Trophy winning season, and he completes 72% of his passes, 11.7 per attempt, 40 touchdowns, 4 picks, quarterback rating of 208.01. And he never lost the ability to still be dynamic with his legs. He still went over 1,000 yards. So you talk about that tutelage under Mike Denbrock. What did all his quarterbacks do by the end of their careers? They could throw. And Desmond Ridder did those numbers despite me talking all season about, like, this guy's not that good of a passer. He's just got really good receivers, and it's a really good system. But I'm not shocked that Desmond Ridder hasn't been in the NFL what NFL people thought he would be by drafting him in the 3rd round. And Jaden Daniels has been that, which is why he was so dominant in Denbrock's system. And we saw Denbrock have success with a redshirt freshman like Deshaun Kaiser coming off the bench in 2015. He had to go from the offense that he was trying to run with Malik, which is going to look a little bit different than the one he's going to run with Deshaun. And we saw how he was able to thrive in that regard as well. So this is a guy that has always wanted to have a passer, a guy that can drop back and throw the football. Yes, he likes guys that can also scramble and run around, but priority number 1 is, can you dominate from the pocket? That is something that Mike Denbrock wants. There's no question about it. And we're going to see that transition this season with whoever starts at quarterback.
Well, it brings up the conversation of having a balanced offense. That's been kind of the thing that's been missing from Notre Dame's offense. And yes, it is all true, like the lack of downfield passing ability, things like that, especially in big games, right? In 2023, you saw it with Central Michigan, Tennessee State, games like that where they were willing to air it out. But then you get to Ohio State, you get to Clemson, you get to Louisville, you get to Duke, and then the downfield passing attack is nowhere to be seen. And then this season, they were a little bit handicapped based on the skill set of what Riley Leonard had. It's not a knock on him. It's just –
and the time he missed in the spring. Yeah. And there's several factors,
And so that plagued them. And where you are left with a lot of confidence is the fact that they still made it to the national championship despite their passing stats being where they were. And they were able to put on.
Sorry. Go ahead.
They were able to put on the performances that they did in the second half against Penn State and the second half against Ohio State, even with some of the handicaps that Riley Leonard had as a downfield passer. Some of it, I think, was just a mental lapse, honestly, because once Riley got into the mindset of, all right, well, I might as well just sling it around, we saw what he did against Penn State. We saw what he did against Ohio State in the second half. So it's interesting. It's going to be awesome to see what he does with a quarterback, with really 3 quarterbacks for an entire offseason. So for all those reasons, I'm excited.
I do think, however, yes, Riley was not a guy that was just going to be a great processor. And I think part of that was being in year one of a system. I think that factored into it as well, and missing all the time and development. And, then Faison goes down, who he clearly liked throwing to. And then Bo Collins gets into his drops issues, and Mitchell Evans was, never the guy that you thought he was going to be. And there was different factors, and not all of them were Riley, and including the fact that Riley Leonard didn't know half the time when he dropped back if he was going to get sacked or not, or get pressured or not. I think there was a lot of things that factored into, why there were some issues. But even then, Trev, even in those situations where I don't disagree with your end result, we still saw growth throughout the year from Riley in the pass game. And we saw him at different times, even during the regular season, where he was much more willing to throw the ball down the field. We've pointed out the Virginia game as an example where, if it's not for some officiating calls, but officiating calls, but they were the proper call, but some calls that brought some things back. Riley Leonard was a much more effective quarterback in the last 2/3 of the season. You're talking about a guy that through the first 4 games of the season first 5 games of the season had 3 touchdown passes, and didn't get his first touchdown pass until the 4th game of the year. And then to see him kind of go the second half of the year where he, in the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, last 11 games of the year, he only failed to throw a touchdown pass once. That was against, I think, Georgia Tech. Yeah, Georgia Tech. And he threw at least 2 touchdown passes in 6 games during that stretch. So I think those are all things that you look at and say, even then you saw the growth. And this isn't a defense of Riley. This is more of a praise of the job that I think that Mike Denbrock and the staff did, which was, even with all the different things, the not knowing what the offensive line was going to look like and how it was going to perform and things like that, that they still got a lot of good production. And if you look at how he performed after the bye, he had on the year, Riley had a quarterback rating of 139.61, but after the bye, he was at 148.64. Far from dynamic, far from like, wow, what a great passing offense. 148, what did I say? 148.64 would have ranked last year 22nd in all of college football, which is not great, but it's a whole lot better than the 49th ranking that they had, because you count the first 5 games. And that's when we saw the Notre Dame offense really take off, is when he started having more success throwing the football. Now, am I saying this to start an argument with you about, no, you're wrong, Trevor, he was good throwing the ball down the field? Nope, I'm agreeing with you. There was a lot of limitations. The point is, look what the offense looked like when he started to get going as a thrower, and I don't think he was as good of a thrower this past year as what these guys will be at some point in time in their careers. Will that be in the opener against Miami? Maybe not. We've talked about that. Talked about that yesterday. I don't think they're going to ask whoever the starting quarterback is to carry the team in September. We discussed that when we were having the Arch Manning versus CJ Carr conversation. They're not going to ask, in my opinion, CJ Carr to put the offense in his shoulders in the opener, because you don't need to. Why? I have 8 words to explain why you're not going to ask CJ Carr to carry the offense, and it's not going to be because he's a redshirt freshman. It's not going to be because he doesn't have this or doesn't have that. Here's my 8 words: Jeremiah, Love, Jadarian, Price, Aeneas, Williams, Kedron, Young. That's why. Whether it's CJ, Kenny, Steve, whoever, they don't need to be stars in the openers, but they're going to have a full offseason of work, which Riley didn't have. They're going to have 2 years now in the system, which Riley didn't have. They're going to know their teammates a lot better going into winter workouts, which Riley didn't. He knew one guy on the team, RJ Oben. That's it. You know, I mean, really new. I mean, he probably
Yeah.
played against Bo Collins and those, but like really new. And so there's all these advantages to it that Riley didn't have. But even with Riley, you saw the growth down the stretch. You saw what that offense looked like when he started throwing the ball. I mean, you know, he came out slinging early against Navy, and you were just like, well, this one's over. I mean, you kind of knew that game was going to be over after the first drive. You're like, okay, Riley's throwing the ball down the field. Riley's hitting post routes over the middle. You guys have no chance. I mean, I don't care what you do. You have no chance. And that's the part that, to me, that starts to get excited about. Like, if they can do that regularly, because the run game's not going anywhere, fellas. You know, run game's not going anywhere. But, man, it starts getting kind of exciting. But that's what the Denbrock offense is about, Trev. That's what you start kind of getting fired up about. And I'm actually looking at Riley's quarterback rating in the semifinals and championship game, and he had a quarterback rating of over 153 in those two games. The problem was he waited till the second half to do it. But we saw in the second halves, the point being that, you know what, there are weapons on this offense.
Oh, yeah.
They can give the quarterback time to throw, and they can rip up good secondaries as long as the quarterback lets her rip. And that's that. Had we not seen that, I don't know that I'd have the same level of excitement going into this offseason. If we didn't see Jordan Faison do what he did in the playoff, if we didn't see Jaden Greathouse do what he did in the playoff, and even Eli Raritan doing the playoff, I might have a different view of my excitement level for this team. It would just be like, well, I hope these quarterbacks can do it, because I don't know what they're going to. You know what I mean? Like, but now it's like you saw that. Now you look at the quarterback and you say, okay, now we're going to really get to see what a Mike Denbrock offense looks like, because I respect the heck out of the fact that he did what he needed to do with the talent he had, Trev. But you brought Mike Denbrock in here to run his offense, and we're going to get one step closer to that next season. And this quarterback battle is going to be a big part of that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to look more balanced. And that's the thing that I'm really excited about. Everything that you said just all feeds back into Notre Dame having a balanced offense. You look at the two teams like Ohio State and Notre Dame, the two teams that played in the national championship on the 20th. And they were known for two very different things. Notre Dame was known for their run game. Jeremiah Love, Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, Aeneas Williams. Ohio State was known for their downfield passing game because they had Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate, and Travion Henderson took a screen pass 75 yards on the last play of the first half in the Cotton Bowl against Texas. But where did those two offenses shine? Ohio State was able to run the football against Notre Dame. Quinshon Judkins ripped off a 70-yard run. Notre Dame was able to push the ball down the field and throw the ball in the second half. Riley Leonard passed for over 200 yards in 2 quarters. You know, so you go through and you start looking at what does that mean? It's offenses are the best when they're balanced. We said it all playoffs. Yes, Steve Sarkisian's a genius mind, and Quinn Ewers can let it fly when he's given the time, and they have a bunch of different receiving weapons. They're at their best when they can run the football and remain balanced. Ohio State, for all the weapons they have on the perimeter, they're at their best when they can run the football. And not run the football in Notre Dame's sense where they're going for 240 a game and rushing for 3 rushing touchdowns a game, but when they're able to establish that. And I believe that that's what the Mike Denbrock offense is going to be at Notre Dame, because there's a lot of people that think, okay, now that Riley Leonard isn't in South Bend anymore and we're not going to see 9 or 10 design quarterback runs, they're now going to throw the football 55 times a game. It's not going to look like a vintage Washington State type of game where it's going to be, all right, well, CJ Carr or Kenny or Steve just had 62.
It's going to be the Fiesta Bowl every week. It's going to be the 21 Fiesta Bowl every single week, man.
Right.
That's what it's going to look like. No.
Right.
No,
right.
It will not.
When Mike Denbrock is in his bag and the quarterback's in a groove, it is very balanced, and it is a very balanced attack. You saw that in the second half against Penn State when they were able to start opening up the run game to rip off big runs, when Riley Leonard was pushing the ball down the field to Jaden Greathouse. So it's all going to be a part of the offense that he wants to run, man.
There are a few things that I want to see from the quarterbacks this spring. Number one, willingness to throw the ball down the field. Now, people need to understand what you and I mean by that. We do not mean that you come out and run 4 verts, 3 out of your 4 pass plays. We do not mean how many different ways can I design post routes to be thrown. It's when those opportunities present themselves, be willing to take it. And then as you have a quarterback that's more comfortable to do that, Trevor, then you can throw the football more and you can be more aggressive, which then softens teams up, which opens up a lot of other things, because an aggressive defense coming down doesn't just impact the run game. It impacts your short and intermediate pass game as well. You have to be willing to take those chances and beat those teams down the field, and then what that does for you. So obviously a willingness and ability to get the ball down the field. An offense where the decision-making is quicker. That was my biggest knock on Riley at times, was he wasn't a quick decision maker. There was a level of, you could tell when he wasn't comfortable, and you could see it early, Trev. I mean, like first quarter against Florida State, you're like, he's not feeling it today. He's not feeling the reads today. He's not feeling the process. He was just missing real simple reads, and it worked for Riley because he was a playmaker. He could miss a read and then scramble around for a 40-yard touchdown. I mean, that's who he was. These guys are not that. These guys have to be more, make the initial right decision. That doesn't mean I'm throwing to the X. Sometimes the initial right decision, and you and I talked about this when we were breaking down a couple of playoff games, is he should have read right instead of left, because if he reads right, he's got 2 on 2, whereas right, he's got 3 over 2. And if he reads the right to the field, the double slant, Jordan Faison's coming open in the catch and run opportunity. I mean, it's things like that too, where it's not just the timing and all that. It's you picked the wrong side to even read. And some of those quick throws where if you're running like snag on the boundary and you're running double slants right, you're not coming back to the double slant. You don't throw blind to a double slant. You've got to read it right now. And they're half field reads. They're meant to be read, check down, or read, scramble. They're not meant to be whole field reads where you read the snag left and then you come back to the slant. Now, sometimes the slant can kind of, if a receiver's smart, he sees the quarterback's not throwing him the ball, he'll level off and work in front of the quarterback's face. That's fine. But that's not part of the design of the play. Now, if I'm running a 3-by-1 and I'm running a slot fade with a backside dig, then I'm reading to the dig side, right? I read the corner for the slot fade to the hitch. If it's not there, and I know I don't have the option route based on pre-snap look, I may then come back because I know, well, hey, that guy, that middle linebacker's over here running with running with this. I know that backside dig is going to open up. And so you'll see that. And you know who was the best at that in the spring last year? CJ Carr. He was the best at getting to that backside dig. That's the full field reads, but those are on more downfield type of concepts. But that's something we need to see more of from quarterbacks. With Riley, you were not going to get the ton of that. You did at times, but it was more going to be read the half field. If it's not there, he's either checking it down or he's taking off running. Well, these quarterbacks are going to be different. So I need to see better decision-making pre-snap, then being more willing to get the ball out in space to your playmakers. But then also, Trev, they've got to be better at attacking the intermediate part of the game, of the field. Has to happen. Absolutely has to happen. What's funny is Riley was a lot better at that than Steve was, because Steve was go routes or check downs, but it's still not where it needs to be. There's still, and we broke this down a week or so ago. We don't need to react, but that's something that I want to see is more of the stops, the comebacks, the outcuts, the digs, the curl routes. Things were there. I mean, there was 3 curl routes that just flat out should have been banged in the championship game. Just easy, you call them stop. I guess they're more stop routes, but it's curl flat concept, but they're more stop routes as opposed to like the post curl type of thing. It's just 15 and stop or 12 and stop. They're open. I mean, dude, first drive of the game, Chris Mitchell should have had 4 or 5 catches just on curls and hitches, and he was open, and Riley missed him twice. First play of the third quarter, Jaden Greathouse wide open on a curl. Riley reads wrong side, tries to come back to him, but he comes back to him late. Like, those things are part of that intermediate zone that we're talking about. And then, of course, being able to hit the seams and hit the overs and things like that, which we didn't see a lot of. We saw it at times. He hit one against Louisville. He hit one against Ohio State on a 3rd and 9. So we saw at times Riley could hit that throw. It was there. You just got to get to it more. So, like, those type of things, that's really where I really want to see this pass offense evolve. And I think all 3 quarterbacks have the physical tools to get there. I think two of them have shown in the times we've seen them play more of a willingness and an ability to hit that, and that's Kenny and Steve and CJ, where Steve has been more of a go route versus one-on-one or check down. That's been more of his game, and I've broken down the reasons why. But those aspects of it that you've got to get better at, and I think you have quarterbacks more built to that. Because even though Kenny can run, Kenny's a passer. Kenny is a really smart passing quarterback who happens to also be athletic. CJ is the same way. And Steve is that way to a degree. So I do think we're going to see more of that stuff from the pass offense this year, Trevor. I think we're going to see more things where the ball gets on the perimeter. All that type of stuff is you're going to see there's been a lot of things built into the pass game that was there that they never got to this year.
Yeah.
Because you had a different type of quarterback. Not bad, because what Riley was really good at what he did. But now you're going to see more of that stuff this season from the pass offense because of the quarterbacks you're going to have.
Yeah, man. I mean, with Riley, it felt like a lot of the downfield passing game and the intermediate passing game, which really in the confines that we're talking about, it is almost one and the same. I think one of the reasons why there was just a lack of it early on in games, especially taking the Orange Bowl and the national championship into account, is I literally think at times, and you could tell based on his read progression, sometimes the ball was coming out right when he hit the top of his drop. As I think for the reasons that you were just saying, it had been open all game. Denbrock finally was just like, hey, you hit the top of your drop and you throw it to this person, they're going to be open. Like that's literally, if you go back through and you watch some of the games, that's what it was. On that third down play to Jaden Greathouse, like there was no other read. Riley made a heck of a throw because he was under pressure and had a man in his face, but the ball was going there the entire time. Yeah, not necessarily like staring down the read, but that's where it was pre-decided before the ball was snapped that that's where the ball was going. And what left me so excited after watching the spring game this past season is you could see with Kenny and CJ's progression, especially with CJ, is it didn't have to be. He was truly seeing the field. It wasn't before the play, Mike Denbrock was, hey, you should peek backside because Deion Colsey's coming wide open on a 13-yard backside dig. It was just CJ knew that it was going to be there. So that's the difference, right? And so that's one thing that's going to be really awesome to see. I'm pumped for it, man. I'm pumped for it.
I want to give some data too to this conversation, Trevor, because I think at the end of the day, what are we talking about here? What goes into being a championship football team? And I think there's a lot of different ways to win. I know we get wrapped up a lot of times, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and you've got to be able to do this. And my answer is you got to be able to do a lot of things well to win a championship, a lot of things well. And part of it's you got to play good defense, right? You've got to have some balance as a football team. You've got to be able to do this. You've got to be able to do that. You got to not be a team that turns the ball over a million times. There's the anomalies, the exceptions like 2017 Clemson or 2016 Clemson. But more often than not, there's certain traits. Well, you know what? One trait that we've seen in the last 10 years, actually, let me go back the last 8 years. It's this. This is the quarterback rating for offenses in the last 8 years of the college football era for the national champion. 171.55, 165.77, 161.98, 168.57, 198.99, 197.40, 154.65, that was with a true freshman, 155.99. That was in 2017. Let me give you Notre Dame's quarterback ratings in the last 8 years during that same stretch of time, and you'll realize only one of those years they came close to that. They were at 140.56 this year, 165.39 last year. The starter was at 159.5, but you couldn't do that in the games that mattered. 147.23 the year before, 149.99 the year before that, 141.94, 153.48. That was a 19 against a weak schedule. 143.32, 120.29, and 142.10. Right? So that number to me matters a whole lot more than how many yards per game you passed for. I want to see the quarterback rating and I want to see the yards per attempt. Those numbers have to get a lot better because I could do the same exact thing when I look at the national champions, Trevor, and point to what they were doing in the pass offense. in a yards per attempt standpoint. Like, and again, Michigan was a very different team than Ohio State. Very different team. I mean, you and I would agree on that, correct? I mean, they were not a team that threw the ball a ton. They were not a team. I mean, they only averaged 213 passing yards per game this past year, the year they won it, where Ohio State averaged 263. And Georgia averaged 295.8 the year before. But you know what Michigan did? They were top 10 in quarterback rating, and their quarterback averaged their offense averaged 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Ohio State this year was at 9.2. Georgia was at 9.0 and 22. They were at 9.3 and 21. Bama was at 11.0 and 20. That's not going to happen. Again, 19. LSU was at 10.6. 18. Clemson, with a true freshman, was one of the lower ones. Let me find Clemson. They were still at 8.2. 2017 with Alabama, that was another bit of an anomaly year, still at 8.2. And then in 2016 with Clemson, I think they were the last one. No, they were still in the 8s as well. And then you look at Notre Dame this past season, and they were at 7.1. I mean, those are the things that you look at and say, 2022, you're at 8.0. Part of that was because Davis Sherwood had a pass that went for over 20 that helped you out. You're at 8.1 in 2021. You were at 7.9 in 2020, 7.9 in 2019, only 8.0 in 2018, 6.6 in 2017. So in most years, your average year was like the bottom level of what championship teams were doing. So yes, you need to do other things, but you have to be an efficient pass offense that has big play capability. Doesn't mean you have to do it 18 times a game. Michigan would not hit a lot of big plays, but you go back and look at the Ohio State game in 2023. What broke that game open in the second half? A couple big plays over the top in the pass game. And Cornelius Johnson hit a couple, and then you had Loveland hit a big pass play. That's because Ohio State was like, hey, we're going to shut down your run game. And they were able to find ways to get the big plays down the field. Against Alabama in the semifinals, what did Michigan do? Hit some big pass plays over the middle, had some catch and runs, were able to find ways to be balanced, be efficient and explosive. Volume of passing is not what I care about. Efficiency and explosiveness is what I care about. And you're going into part of the transition we talked about earlier as we wrap this up, and we'll actually get into the specific battle next. But you're transitioning to an era where the expectation is, because of the talent you have at quarterback, because of the offensive coordinator you have, and the skill talent you're putting around it. Right now, portal needs to help with that, but high school recruiting needs to help with it even more also. But you're in a situation where those numbers need to start going up and up and up and getting on the level of what we've seen from championship teams in the past. I don't give one rip about how many yards they throw for on average. I don't care as much about how many attempts per game they have, because that varies from team to team. What I care about is what is your efficiency and explosiveness when you do throw the ball on the season as a whole, but especially in the big games. And you go look at Notre Dame's yards per attempt in the first half against Penn State, it was abysmal. You go look at Notre Dame's yards per attempt in the second half against Penn State, and you know exactly why they scored 24 points in 30 minutes. Despite the fact they still couldn't really run the ball that well. They had that first drive, they ran the ball well, but they weren't really ripping them up. It just softened Penn State up, and then Riley took that game over.
Yeah.
But it was because of your ability to throw the football efficiently with some explosiveness. That's what changed. Same thing in the second half against Ohio State.
Well, and some of the numbers, too, just to put it into context and frame of what it means for Notre Dame, is with pass efficiency numbers and yards per attempt, they went up under Mike Denbrock regimes, too. You go back through and you look at what Cincinnati did in 2017 in his first year with Desmond Ridder. 6.0 yards per attempt, passer rating of 117.8. By the time that he was done, they had 8.4 yards per attempt and a passer rating of 157.9. At LSU, from 2022 to 2023, they went from 7.5 yards per attempt and a quarterback passer rating of 140.7 to, in 2023, 10.7 yards per attempt that led college football and a passer rating of 192.5, which also led college football. So all of those numbers that Bryan laid out and that indicated, those are the trends that Mike Denbrock has had with his offenses and with his quarterback specifically, when he's had time to develop them, when he's had time to groom them, which is all reasons why this quarterback battle is going to be really fun to dive into.
Now, LSU won 0 championships during that stretch. right? Because it shows you need to be able to do other things. You have to play like this thing called defense. But the point is, but the offense did their part. I mean, you and I talked about this I think it was I can't remember who I did the show with, but we said, could you imagine if you took the 23 LSU offense and put it with the 23 Notre Dame defense? Like, that team would have been insane, insanely good. But he did his part, and Matt House didn't do his. Brian Kelly didn't do his. You hope that the other side's going to do their part at Notre Dame. You hope that that's going to be the case, and you feel confident that that'll happen when Marcus Freeman is the head coach. But that's where Marcus Freeman is trying to take this offense. And again, I don't care if it's 30 passes a game on average or 22 passes a game on average. I don't care if your quarterback goes 16 of 22 for 240 yards, or if he goes 30 of 43 for 500 or 402 yards. I don't care. As long as the yards per attempt, the efficiency is in that range that I think a championship offense looks like. And I come to that conclusion not by how I feel about it. Let's look at the numbers. The numbers tell you what it is. The offenses in a lot of those different years look very different, but the numbers are still were what they were. And even Michigan was not in an anomaly where, well, everybody else did that, but no, Michigan still was a top 10 caliber team in quarterback rating and yards per attempt. They just didn't throw the ball as much. They were a running team that played great defense, but their pass game was still efficient and had explosive capability. Absolutely.
So, Brian, we're going to get ready to dive into the battle specifically. We talked big picture. We've talked what it means for Mike Denbrock's impact. So let's go through and break down the quarterback battle specifically with all the people involved. But listen, folks, before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame football and college football as much as you do. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian. So we've talked about what this offense could potentially look like. We've talked about the Mike Denbrock impact. We've talked about this battle, big picture, what it could mean on the team and the impact that it could have on the rest of the locker room. But let's dive into who's in it, what this battle means, what are the things that we start to look for. So when you start to evaluate this quarterback battle in 2025, when you look at the people involved and the players involved, Brian, where do you start? You're muted.
Like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about what we need to see? There's pros and cons. There's all these different things, right? The first thing that I think is the foundation of this, and I hope I'm answering your question that you just asked. But the first thing is there needs to be an honest competition, right? I mean, you talked about it. The quarterback battle has already started. It started the minute the plane landed back in South Bend after the championship game. I mean, that's when it really started. And it's a three-man battle. Everybody has their favorites. Everybody has the guy that they think is going to be the guy. And that's fine. At the end of the day, I hope that all Notre Dame fans can say, hey, look, we're going to rally behind whoever wins the job. But here's the thing. That's got to happen in the locker room too, as well, Trevor. And the way that happens is because there's an honest competition. There's got to be an honest competition. Now, what is an honest competition? It's several things. Number one is it's one where you really feel like everybody gets the reps and the opportunities to perform. What frustrated me last year with Marcus Freeman was entire spring. I've said this before. I think CJ Carr is the best of the group. I think Kenny Minchie's next in line, right on CJ's heels. And I think Steve is at the bottom as far as the potential of what they could be. And my frustration is CJ'd have a great performance and we'd hear all these great things. And then Marcus Freeman would be like, well, yeah, but he's doing it against the threes. Well, that's not his fault. You're the one that's choosing to put him on the threes the whole time. So, like, what's not an honest competition? CJ Carr gets, and I'm going to say CJ because I have said in the past that I think CJ is the best of that group, has the most upside. But if CJ gets all the number one reps and Kenny gets all the number two reps and Steve gets all the number three reps and they all get the same amount of reps, but they're working with those teams, that's not an honest competition because Steve never got those opportunities with the ones. And then you could flip it. You could put Kenny with the ones or Steve with the ones. But if that's all we see, then that's going to be an issue. there needs to be some level of, okay, there's a balance in opportunity with the top group in similar settings. So if, CJ's in there in base team drills and he leads the number one offense against base defense and they go up and down the field and score. And then you put Steve in the game with the ones during the blitz period when all they're doing is blitzing. And he's like, well, Steve didn't have the same completion percentage as CJ had. He got sacked more times. Well, duh, because in CJ's period, they didn't blitz him. And in Steve's period, that's all they were doing. And it's a defensive period. So of course he's not going to look as good. So however you want to insert name here, there can't be that because players see that. Like, well, yeah, you guys let CJ and Steve got all these 1 reps and Kenny had to go with the 2s all the time. Like Kenny didn't get a fair shot. No, there's all different ways that you can say that wasn't really an open competition. And this guy, he got his reps. Yeah, I get that he got his reps. But if you're going to say, well, yeah, but he did those against the 2s and 3s, well, if you didn't give him a chance then to show that against the 1s, that's on you, not him. He lit up the people you put him in front of him. And if you want to see him do it against the 1s, then freaking put him in against the 1s and see if he can do it with the 1s, not in a scrimmage where, Kenny's with the 2s and CJ's with the 1s or CJ's with the 1s and Steve's with the 2s or vice versa. And it's the 1 offense and 1 defense against the 2 offense and 2 defense. And you're like, CJ outplayed Kenny in that one. Well, yeah, he was going against the number 2 defense and Kenny was going with the number 1 offensive line and number 1 receivers. And Kenny was going against the number 1 defense with the number 2 offensive line and the number 2 pass catchers. That's not an even competition if that's all they do. But there is some of that makes an honest competition if you're giving different guys opportunity. So if the next day, now Steve's with the 1s and Kenny's with the 2s or CJ's with the 2s, now that's how you start to evaluate. Like, look, the 1s moved a lot better when Kenny was in the game than when CJ or Steve was in the game. And Kenny also, even though he didn't perform as well in that quote-unquote head-to-head, we're not evaluating that. We're not evaluating how he did with the 2s against the 1s. We're going to look at the 4 days in a row and we're going to say, here's Kenny's numbers with the 1s. Here's CJ's numbers with the 1s. Here's so-and-so's numbers with the 1s. But look who ran the number 2 best. Kenny was, they were all kind of the same with the 1s because the 1s are really good against the number 2 defense. But this guy over here, he did the best leading the second group against the 1s. Now that's where you start to see some separation. So it may not look like it's a fair competition. And if they only go against the 2s and go with the 2s and 3s, that's not a fair competition. But if you're mixing them around, that's how you start to evaluate the room. As you may think, well, so-and-so was with the 3s that day, and they were going against the 1s. That's not fair. But you know what I saw as a coach? I saw a quarterback that showed poise while he was getting his butt kicked. I saw a guy that was, every time he got sacked, he was getting up, patting his lineman on the head. Hey, don't worry about it. He wasn't throwing his helmet down or throwing his ball down or yelling at his lineman because he'd go, freaking block for me. No, I saw a kid that was poised. When that other kid got over there, he was getting flustered. He was rushing the ball. I'm evaluating that because in a game, I may not have you in there with the 3s, but there may be a time where the 1s are getting their butt kicked by the other team's 1s, and I need to know how you're going to handle that pressure. And so it's all an evaluation. So you want to see different times where Steve's with the 3s, Steve's with the 2s, Steve's with the 1s, CJ's with the 3s, right? You get what I'm saying, Trev?
Yeah.
And you evaluate all of that. But if one guy's always with the 1s and one guy's always with the 3s, that's not an open competition. And it doesn't have to be directly 33.3, 33.3, 33.3, and then 0.1 goes to, Tyler Buckner, Anthony Rizak. That's not what we're talking about. There needs to be some level of everybody's getting opportunities. And as somebody starts to separate, 2 guys start to separate, then you can say, okay, now let's go over there and these 2 guys are separating. Let's let them now go with the 1s and 2s, whenever that may be. And that's kind of where I look at it, Trevor, and say that's an honest competition. And if you have an honest competition and you play the guy that does the best, most consistently, moves the team the best most consistently, shows the attributes you need, you pick that guy based on how he does that, not because he's the most experienced, not because he's the best athlete, not because he's the highest upside or highest ranked guy. I just literally named all 3 guys and the advantage that they all have. But it's because this guy moved the team the best, most consistently. And if that's Steve, so be it. If it's Kenny, so be it. If it's CJ, so be it, as long as it's for that reason, not some arbitrary, yeah, I know CJ and Kenny outplayed Steve, but we saw Steve, he's done it before in games. So freaking what? Somebody in the show, Steve, all he does is win. He went 1 and he did a great job in the Sun Bowl against an 8-5 Oregon State team. Don't care. There's things you learned from that, but that doesn't mean he's the starter. He's going to have to earn it on the practice field. Just like I don't care that CJ Carr was a 5-star recruit on my board. I don't care that he was the highest ranked recruit on Rivals and 247 and ESPN compared to Kenny and Steve. Don't care. That doesn't matter to me. Do you move the offense the best? I don't care that Kenny's the best athlete or might throw the prettiest ball. It's debatable between him and CJ. Doesn't matter. Who moves the offense the best? And then if the guy that does that's the least experienced, you got to get experience somehow. And the great thing is Notre Dame, with the offensive line and talent around him and the defense they should have, you've got some time where you don't need that guy to come out of the gate, looking like senior year version of Joe Burrow.
Sure.
You don't need that. And so as long as they do that, I think they keep the locker room intact. As long as they do that, I could see more guys in the room staying. But if you don't run a fair competition, you will see the guys that didn't get that fair shot bounce. And you're going to see a fractured locker room, and you're going to see an offense that doesn't perform as well because people are going to know we're not putting our best guy out there. And y'all may not realize this, but trust me, players know that stuff. They see receivers see that. Hold on a second. We're starting him? I mean, I'm the guy that's got to catch passes from these guys, and that ain't the dude. That's the dude. And offensive line can be like, well, man, we give up way more sacks when that guy's in the game than the other guy's in the game. Or we're protect this guy and he keeps running and scrambling or, rushing throws or whatever. I mean, the players see that stuff. So as long as it's an open competition and the best man wins, Trev, I think this quarterback battle will end up strengthening the locker room more so than hurting it. That's how I feel about it. But that's the most important ingredient. When you talk about pros and cons, I think the biggest pro for me, Trevor, of a quarterback battle is you get to see guys compete. And the winners, competition brings out the best in them. The non-winners, they fold in battles like this. And so you see who's really that guy. Maybe 2 guys, maybe even 3, hopefully 3. But I think that's the biggest thing for me is the competition alone is going to force all these guys to every day try to be at their best. And whoever wins the job, that's going to make him a lot better off when the season starts.
There's a lot of pros for me. You go through and you think of one. It's something that we discussed at the opening of the show. They're going with one of their guys, one of their recruited players that they brought to Notre Dame to have the opportunity to start under center in South Bend. And that's noteworthy, especially when you given the track record, albeit a reasonable and understandable track record, but of their history of bringing in transfer portal quarterbacks. Did it in 21, did it in 23, did it last season. So that for me is number one. It's the benefit of the competition is you're going with one of the guys currently on your roster. 2, I think competition elevates play. I really do. And there's so many different cliches and phrases, iron sharpens iron, all this other stuff. And it's all true. But when you do go through a competition, you get to see the best in people. Or sometimes you could potentially see the worst in somebody, and that is a factor in the competition. It's like, okay, well, he's just not the guy. What
you see, Trev, is it's not the best or the worst. It's you see truth.
Mm-hmm.
Who you are truly gets defined by these competitions. Mm-hmm. So, that's what bringing the best or worst out of is it's the truth. It's like a truth serum. Competition's a truth serum. Now we really find out we call them half-speed heroes. Or scout team All-Americans when I was coaching. That guy that's down there and he's balling out against the scout team defense, and then you put him against your ones and he cowers. Or he's out there making these great grabs over the middle against the scout team guys who can't hit him, but then you go to a scrimmage situation, he's like, I don't want to get hit by our starting safety. That's what it is. Competition brings out who you are, not your best. It brings out who you are. And if your best is what comes, then that tells me you are a competitor. And if you don't, then that tells me you're not that guy. Like one of the things I heard this spring is there was a practice where Riley was already out and Steve was sick. And that happened to be a day where Mike Al Golden brought out a lot of heat, a lot of heat. And talking to some people in the program, you're like, we learned a lot about Kenny and CJ today. Neither of them played well, but the way that they battled told us a lot. And that's what I'm saying. Like competition, it's a truth serum, Trev. And that's your point. Like what you're saying about it brings out the best of the worst. It's a truth serum. You are defined by how you handle competition. Because if you can't handle a quarterback competition, you're not going to handle playing down in Miami in the opener. You're not going to handle playing Ohio State in a rematch in the national championship game or the semifinals or quarterfinals or whatever. Because I know you buckled on the practice field because we were, tracking all your throws and you had to outperform CJ and Kenny or Steve and CJ or Steve and Kenny or whatever combination you want to have. And like that's what I love about competitions, man. It's a truth serum.
Another pro for me is we're finally going to get an idea. I don't want to use the word finally in that they haven't yet, but we're going to get the opportunity to see what type of progression a quarterback can have in this offense. Is Gino Guidugli the quarterback coach that we thought? Because you go through and think it's like, well, he's gotten some good recruits. The offense has gotten some good recruits, but then they just bring in a starter over top to then come in and start. They did that in 23 and they did it this past season. So that's another benefit for me. You go and you see, it's like, okay, is the development of these guys where they need to be? Is it up to par to continue this down the road? Because we said at the start of the show, Notre Dame might be in a position where hopefully the days of taking a one and done transfer portal guy is done. But in order for that to be true, you're going to have to keep continuing the development. You're going to have to keep continuing bringing in guys who have such a high ceiling, but getting them ready to play at this level. It's another benefit of this competition for me. You go and you talk about this battle as a whole. One of the reasons why I'm so excited about it is because I believe that they have three guys that are all really competitive. From the stories that I've heard everybody else talk about, Steve, for some of his, I don't want to call them flaws, but you hear the stories about like the ball comes out different with CJ and Kenny. But if there's one thing that people always talk about with Steve is he's a competitor. He's a competitive kid. Never backs down from a challenge. He believes that he's the best guy in the room. And I have to believe that CJ believes that. And I have to believe that Kenny believes that. And that is the making for an awesome competition.
Steve Angeli's intangibles take a backseat to no one. We could argue that his arm talent does and his athleticism does and all those other type of things, but his intangibles take a backseat to no one. That's the only reason he's in this competition. I mean, guys, if his intangibles aren't what they were, he wouldn't have been the backup quarterback this year, and he probably would have already transferred by now because they would have told him, you're never going to be quarterback here. The intangibles are what make him good. But that's the thing, Trev, is you're going to find out about these kids because of the competition. I think part of the challenge that they're going to have is I don't think any of these kids are going to fold. I think they're all going to play really well this spring, and it's going to make it a tough decision. And you kind of hope to a degree that that's true. You don't want a guy to start, and here's the final piece to this before we dive into the specifics of the players. You want the winner of this battle to be the guy that truly seized hold, not earned it, because three guys could not play well, but one earned it because he played better than the other three in a level of not very good. So it's not about a guy earns it. You want a guy to seize it. You want a guy to grab a hold of it. I used it, the Herb Brooks quote from the movie Miracle. This is your opportunity. Take it. This is your moment. Take it. Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, Anthony Rizak, whoever, Blake Hebert, whoever. This is your moment. Seize it. You want one of those guys to really do that. Maybe two of those guys to really do that. That's going to be a big key. If the coaching staff is saying, man, these kids are all playing their butts off, this is going to be a tough decision. That's like, okay, that's awesome to hear. But if it's like, yeah, we're not sure who the quarterback is going to be because nobody really grabbed hold of it this spring, that's not what we want to hear. And so that storyline that we're hearing behind the scenes and what we see with our eyes during practices, Trevor's going to go a long way towards us knowing if this quarterback situation is going to be good. Because even if the guy that we all, our favorite guy that we all pick, everybody, I can tell you all I want. I'm open. I'll support whoever, but I'm not going to also hide the fact of who I think the best guy in the room is and who the second best guy in the room is. But at the end of the day, if my quote unquote, my guy wins it, but he wins it more by default because of all the three quarterbacks who didn't play well, he played the least not well, or that's not going to make me feel warm and fuzzy because my guy won it. I'll feel a lot better knowing that my guy didn't win it because somebody else outplayed him at a high level. That's going to make me feel a whole lot better than my guy won it in what was an otherwise sort of ugly spring period for all the quarterbacks. So that's the final piece is you hope that whoever wins it sees really just okay, that's the guy. That's the guy. Yep. I mean, I love that guy and he's my dude and he's my roommate, but I love you, buddy. But you may have loved Garrett Kubiak and he may have been your best friend on the team, but you also knew that John Elway was your best quarterback. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Guys know that. They'll see that. And sometimes even the other quarterbacks are like, look, man, I did my best. And that guy's different. They know that. I mean, they like it, but they can see it. You hope that that's the case. And that's my final piece to this big picture part of the battle before we dive into the three players and what we like and maybe some concerns and what they need to improve upon.
Well, I think that's a perfect transition, Bryan, to really break down the three guys that are in the heat of this competition. And so I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a situation where you hear it in the practice reports of so-and-so might have not had a great practice. They're going back to their dorm and counting down the seconds until they get back out on the field to have a redemption type, bounce back type of day. And I think all those things are going to be the makings of a really, really good competition.
Yeah. So let's talk about the guys, Trev. Let's just go right into it.
Love it. So starting out with the most veteran guy in the room, Steve Angeli. Let's kind of break down his stance on this in this competition, the pros, the cons, the areas of improvement, what advantages they might have. So when you look at a guy like Steve Angeli with this one, Bryan, where do you start your evaluation?
It's you start where we just ended with him. It's the intangibles. It's you need to see that now that he's truly in a competition, because Steve's never had this kind of pressure on him before. He's known the last 2 years he's the backup. And a lot of guys can thrive when they're the backup. Even in the bowl game, he knew going into the bowl game that he's not going to be the starter next year. I mean, he knew who the starter was going to be the next year. I think Riley had already committed by then. I think Riley committed in December, early December, if I remember correctly, like around December 6th or 7th or somewhere around there. He knew he was going to be a starter. There was no pressure on him. Now there's pressure on him because he's battling for the starting job. What you need to see from Steve in that is that those intangibles that we all love, going back to, and this kind of leads into takes me back to my rant yesterday about the spring game. What was the first sign that we all had that Steve Angeli's a cool cat? I don't care about anything they do in high school. It's watching that kid in the last 5 minutes of a running clock in the blue gold game just calmly take his team down the field and then scramble that ball in as the clock expired to win the game for his team. And the only emotion he showed the entire time was after he scored the winning touchdown. You're like, dude, that guy is cool under pressure, man. Like now again, it was a spring game, but still, he was a freshman. He should have been in his second semester as a senior in high school. He should have been going to prom. He should have been hanging out with his buddies after 4 years of high school. And here he is in Notre Dame Stadium, just cool as can be. He's been in this offense for a month, just right down the field, touchdown. Like that's what you need to see now that there's pressure on him. Is those intangibles? It's the confidence. It's the swagger he carries. I mean, Steve, like you said it earlier, Trev, and I agree with it. Steve thinks he's a lot better than he actually is physically, but he needs to be, because if Steve had the same opinion of himself that I have, he would just be like, I'm happy being a backup quarterback. And he wouldn't be in this battle. He's in this battle because he thinks he's a really good quarterback. And that's good. That's a compliment. That's not an insult, because that's the only way he's going to have a shot to win this job. And not just win the job, because that's just step one. Winning the job, step one. The important part is now go out there and win football games. But he'll be that because he thinks he's the man. And that's why he'll be calm late in games. That's why he was calm coming off the bench in the Orange Bowl. That's why he was calm going into the Sun Bowl. It's why he's been calm any other time he's had to step on the field. It's because, like, I got this. Been doing this my whole life. He hasn't. He barely played in high school because, unfortunately for him, his junior year was his first year as a starter, was the COVID year. Only got to play like 7 or 8 games. But he just plays like he's like a 10-year NFL veteran. That's the kind of poise that he has. And that's the foundation of why he's in this battle, in my opinion.
Whenever I think about Steve Angeli, I think of a movie quote, and it was, do you remember in the first Fast and the Furious movie when Vin Diesel and Paul Walker sit down at that diner when they get done fixing up that Mitsubishi like 3000 GT, and Paul Walker got like really worked up, and Vin Diesel was like, "Listen, Brian, don't lose your cool. That's your meal ticket." Like that's immediately I think of Steve Angeli, because that's him. He's cool, calm, he's collected, he keeps his poise. And that for me is a big reason why, Brian, to your point, he's in this competition, is because that's him. He's kept his cool under the pressure that he had been in. Now, limited pressure, I will say, I think that his one drive performance against Penn State kind of spoke a little bit more to that than the Sun Bowl performance. Yeah, it was a bowl game. You were going against a depleted Oregon State team. You were going into that game knowing you weren't most likely going to be the starter. You know what I mean? So for me,
people say, well, Notre Dame was missing guys too. I'm like, guys, you lose Joe Walton, you put in Charles Jagasol. Right? You lose Blake Fisher, you put in Tosh Baker. That's different than Oregon State's losing their guy and they're putting in some kid that will not be starting for them next year. You know what I mean? Like, there's a big difference between Notre Dame losing guys and Oregon State losing guys. But still, to your point, there was a different level of pressure in those two situations.
Yeah, and what he was able to do against Penn State and come in a spot where Notre Dame needed points to hang around in that game and not give Penn State all the momentum going into halftime. Steve Angeli comes in and he goes 6 of 7, leads them on their first scoring drive of the game. That's the cool. That's the meal ticket.
After he got sacked and fumbled. And that's the thing, is when he got sacked and fumbled, they weren't in a scoring range. Now, we're going to address that part here in a minute. But you're gonna fail sometimes. You're gonna throw a pick. You're gonna fumble. You're going to get sacked when you shouldn't get sacked, all those different types of things. But it's how do you respond to that? And how he's like, okay, just drop back the very next play and got the ball out again. And that's something you really like. I mean, he got sacked against Oregon State. I mean, we've seen him have mistakes before, and he just doesn't seem to let it bother him. Now, it's a different situation now. There's a lot more on the line now. But that's the thing about Steve. And look, Steve's got some arm talent. Like, let's not act like he's just like this kid with no ability that's just super smart. He's got more talent than Drew Pine had. He has more God-given ability than what Tommy Rees had physically. He's got a better arm than Tommy had. He has a better arm than what Drew Pine had. He's bigger than what Drew Pine was. He's a better athlete than what Drew Pine was. And that's why I say no matter who starts, they're going to go 10-2 next year. Just the reality of it. They're going to be minimum 10-2 because all these guys. I'm going to watch Drew Pine go 8-2 with a team that doesn't have the talent that this team is going to have, and he's a better quarterback than what Drew Pine was. So you look at it and say the floor is pretty high with Steve. You're not going to you have a better chance of having a disappointing season with one of the other two younger guys than you do Steve. The difference is I think you have a chance for an even greater season with those other two guys because the floor is higher, but the ceiling is not. But Steve is also a guy but he has some arm talent. He throws a pretty deep ball. And we've seen that throughout his tenure. I mean, he sees a one-on-one outside. He's not afraid to take it. I mean, the slot fade to Jaden Harrison against Purdue was a beautiful ball. He threw a slot fade for a touchdown to Jordan Faison last year. You know, that throw he ran where he's running to his left and he hits Cooper Flanagan in the end zone. That was a nice throw. And we saw that against when he's come off the bench at other times when he's thrown the ball down the field. We've seen him against Oregon State last year, had 2 nice deep balls. One Jordan Faison was wide open. The other, he was covered. And Steve slightly underthrew it, but it was enough to where the guy wasn't able to get a hand on it. He throws a pretty deep ball. He does. And that's the thing. And he's a quality athlete also. So Steve's sack issues have more to do with feel than they do with lack of athleticism. Because he's a quality athlete. I mean, he showed that on that one quarterback designed run against Purdue where he broke like 3 tackles and picked up 20-some yards. Yeah. He's not a stiff back there, but he's got good arm talent. He's a smart kid from the standpoint of he understands the offense. Now, we'll talk about some processing issues here in a minute. He has good arm strength. He has, he throws a clean ball too, Trevor. Like, that's the one thing that's going to be true of all 3 of these quarterbacks. They all throw really clean. And what I mean by that is they all throw mostly spirals and they're pretty tight, which as a receiver makes it a lot easier to catch. Is also better in late in the year when the weather's not great. A tight spiral with really faster revolutions is going to cut through the wind a lot better than a ball that doesn't have as many revolutions or doesn't come out on a spiral. Like if that nose is kind of going like this, that wind's going to take it and it's going to make it better. If you keep that sucker really tight, that ball's going to come out and it's going to cut through the wind. And so they all have that. They all throw really pretty tight balls. Now, to varying degrees, but Steve has that as well.
In the sample sizes that we've seen Steve come in and play as well, he makes pretty good decisions. Now, I will say, like, when I mean good decisions, I mean he doesn't put the ball into harm's way to be turned over.
When he throws, yeah.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen him do one. What the freaking heck was that throw in his career? And that was against Stanford last year. Remember, he hit that linebacker right in the chest. And they didn't let him throw again after that. But in practices, in scrimmages, and I mean, we haven't seen him make those type of throws, Trevor. That's the point you're making, and I tend to agree with that. He's not going to go out there next year and throw 13 interceptions.
Now, there was a moment in the Sun Bowl where, again, you love the confidence and you love where his heart's at. Probably not a hurdler. I remember there was a moment where he ran on a quarterback draw and tried to hurdle a guy and then fumbled the football. So that's one of those where love the confidence, Steve. Maybe let's keep both feet on the ground. But in terms of, in all seriousness, in terms of his throwing ability, he doesn't put the ball into harm's way a lot. Some of that does kind of come from the lack of read progression that he has, like his ability to see the whole field. Because, Bryan, to your point, it is either a one-on-one slot fade or one-on-one to the outside goal ball, or it is a check down. And when you put yourself into those situations, you are also minimizing your chance to throw a pick. Yeah. So,
that's the cons of Steve, right? The things he's going to have to improve upon. That's it right there. He's an all or nothing thrower. And you can't run an offense like that, especially against good teams. I mean, we've complained how many times about how Notre Dame just didn't do enough throwing the ball, really pressing teams down the field. And I broke down the numbers a week or two ago where if you look at how Steve performed in Penn State and Oregon State, the 2 games where he played meaningful snaps, he threw fewer balls down past 10 yards past the line than Riley did. Now, he threw more balls 20 yards past the line, but way fewer in that 10 to 19 range, to your point. It was all or nothing with Steve. And there's reasons for that. And I think it's the reasons for that are really what he needs to improve upon. It's not like, hey, Steve, I need you to be more willing to throw those routes over the middle. It's you got to fix what causes him to do that. And here's some things that cause him to do that, in my opinion. Number one, I don't think Steve processes quite as quickly as the other quarterbacks from the standpoint of processing includes not just reading the defense, but having your body and mind work together. There's quarterbacks that you'll see that can read the ball, the route just as much and anticipate just as much. But when I see it, now I start my motion and I'm getting the ball out. Where other quarterbacks are like they're moving and their feet are leading. So like when my eyes come over, my feet have already moved. So when I see that, I've already brought my feet over. I see it. I'm just going right into my throwing motion. But if I'm kind of turning here, oh, he's open. Now I got to reset my feet, open my hips, get the ball out. I'm late against Ohio State. That may work against Purdue, but I'm late against Ohio State. And so what Steve would do is he would see that, and then by the time he's ready to throw, it's not there. Because you'll see him kind of go like this at times in practice and scrimmages and in the blue gold game where it's like he knew what was there, but he wasn't ready to throw it. That's concerning when he's number 3 of these 3 quarterbacks in that area, and he's in his 3rd year in the team, and the others are in 2 and 1. And that's a big reason for that. I also don't think Steve has shown the comfort in going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 as far as his route options, not his reads, because you don't often get to your 4th read. You normally have 1 read that's going to take you to 1 or 2 option. So if I'm running curl flat, I don't have 2 reads per se. I have my read and an alert defender. The alert defender simply, okay, I've got to be aware of this guy buzzing out, but my read is being done off him. So my read's off him, and unless the alert defender has just gotten into my line of sight, I'm getting that ball out on the curl route. So it's 1 read for 2 guys. Then 3-4 as I'm coming to my backside. Okay, this guy took him and they're covered. This linebacker buzzed out underneath. So now if that guy buzzes underneath my curl, I now know that my backside high-low is going to ISO the will linebacker, and I'm going to throw away from him. Steve has not shown the same level of comfort getting to that part of the offense. And you saw it against Purdue. You even saw it against Oregon State. The one thing that you have to understand when you break down the Oregon State film is Steve never got past his 2nd read. Never had to. And there was a couple times where I'd have liked to seen him do it, but if it wasn't there, he was either checking it down or running. There's some merit to that at times, but you have to be willing, especially against the better teams, to hit deeper into your progressions when you get that kind of time. And then the other thing Steve isn't great at is if he doesn't have the check down, he hasn't shown a comfort with what to do next. He'll run himself into trouble. He doesn't have a great feel for, like, he's a good athlete, but he hasn't shown a great feel for what to do when things aren't there. And that's a big reason why he gets sacked so much. It's not that he's not a good athlete. It's that he just doesn't have that pocket feel to say, and that's where his lack of experience in high school hurts him the most. Because Steve threw from barely 2,000 yards in his high school career. I'm actually going to look that up and see that. But again, because he played at such a big-time program, that he didn't start till his junior year, and he caught a bit of a bad break in that his junior year happened to be 2020, and he didn't get to play a whole lot during that tenure. So he only threw for, I think it was. I think he threw for like 1,700 yards his last year. I don't think he had 3,000 total yards in his entire high school career. Actually, let me see, because he threw for 900 something his first 2 years, and I think he was like 1,784 in his senior year. So again, he's a kid that's barely thrown. I don't even think he's thrown for 3,000 yards in his high school career. Barely did it. Barely over, actually barely over 2,000 yards in his career. Yeah, he didn't get to 3,000 yards in his career. I don't believe. That's where that lack of experience, it's not his fault. It's not his fault. There was a COVID year that cost him half of a season. It's not, that's not his fault. But the reality is that's where his lack of experience, I think, hurts him, because he just doesn't have that thousands of reps that Kenny has, who was a 3-year starter, and CJ has, who was that guy as well. And you see it really in that processing to get to reads 3 and 4. And also he played on the best high school team of all of them, meaning the town around him, where Kenny was his team's talent. And CJ had some like 1AA and D2 type of guys, but CJ was by far the best player on his team. And that's really where you see the difference, because those guys have just had to do it so much more. They're a lot more comfortable going to reads 2, 3, and 4. I mean, Kenny Minchie threw for more yards in his junior year of high school than Steve Angeli threw for his entire career in high school. He threw for more touchdowns in his junior year of high school than Steve Angeli threw his entire career. Steve has and Kenny got hurt and missed a chunk of his senior year. Still did that. CJ Carr threw for, he had 6,000, 7,000, actually more than that during his career. Let me pull up his stats. Just his last 3 years of high school, CJ Carr passed for over 8,100 yards, 78 touchdowns, and he rushed for 16 touchdowns. It's not even that Steve couldn't have done that if presented with the opportunities. He didn't get those opportunities. And I think that lack of experience is why you see him just not have the greatest pocket feel. And that's something that hopefully he can improve upon if he's going to be the starter. Otherwise, you're going to see them give up a lot of sacks. And that's where he'll eventually start making some of those big mistakes, because he'll throw kind of like, I don't know where to go. Let me throw that blind check down. Because the thing that helped him against Penn State is they were bailing. And it just made those checkdowns super easy to get to because they were just playing off because it was the last minute of the half. You won't have that opportunity in more base down situations or against better teams. Playing against A&M and Miami is going to be a whole different animal than playing against Oregon State and El Paso. So if he doesn't show that better pocket feel, then that's what's going to keep him from that. I mean, you can ask anybody that's been at a practice that understands quarterback play. And you'll look at Steve, and he almost always has the highest completion percentage. Why? Because he throws a million checkdowns in practice. I don't want to see that in practice all the time. That's when you take your chances. Let me see if I can fit this ball in there. You know what I mean? And that's what I want to see more of from him. Is just more of that. Go deeper into your reads. Let your feet lead you through your read. Be a little bit more instinctive with your processing of those throws, and don't just say it's not there. Check down. That's what I need to see more of from him.
Some of the things that you talked about with his body not being up to speed with his mind kind of reminds me a little bit of Tommy Rees in a sense. I do think that Steve has a little bit more arm strength than what Tommy Rees did, but that was kind of the difference we saw back in 2012 between Everett and Tommy. Everett might not have always been like right on time with reads that he should have been, but his arm strength made up for him being slightly late, whereas Steve has to be more of a Tommy Rees-esque type of where the timing has to be there because he might not have that rip it in their strength that Everett might have had, you know? So I think all of that is one of the factors into maybe Steve has really good for his confidence, like a really good self evaluation to where he might know that he doesn't have the ability to fit it in there and let it rip. So
because he has a very long throwing motion, where CJ, like Kenny's looks long because he comes it out here, but it's actually really quick. Steve has a much more deliberate throwing motion than those other guys, which also factors into that, Trevor, to your point. Now, Trevor, my guy Trevor, I saw his senior highlight films. He had a quick release. He got that sucker out quick.
Some of it I had to, but that's another conversation.
I saw your highlight tape in that regard too, buddy. Trust me, I believe that.
Yeah. So another conversation for another day. But you know, moving the train along here, Bryan. Did you have anything else on Steve before?
No, I mean, I think we hit. Look, there's a reason he's in this competition, but what people have to understand is there's a reason that Notre Dame didn't turn to him as a junior. And why they went to Riley Leonard. They didn't go get Riley Leonard because they didn't have confidence in the backups behind Steve. It's because they didn't think Steve was ready for that job as a junior. There's a reason for that. And I know that some people don't want to understand that. And we're not saying that's who he's always going to be. But if you don't understand what the coaches see, what I see in practice, like there's this notion like, well, you like this guy. I don't care what CJ Carr's ranking was. I don't care what I ranked at CJ Carr. I don't care that I ranked him higher than the other two guys in that I'm going to feel a certain way if he's not the guy. I don't care. What I care about is Notre Dame winning. So if I ranked them CJ, Kenny, and Steve coming out of high school, if the order of who gives them the best chance to win is Steve, Kenny, CJ, I don't care. Like we all have to let go of who we like and evaluate what they're doing. And for the people that are on the Steve Angeli hype train, and I'm good, be there, support the kid. He's an awesome kid. But you got to understand what the issues that people have with him, in fact, are. And again, it's not just me. I promise you the things that I'm pointing to are things that the coaches know. If I know it, I promise you that Mike Denbrock knows it. I hope Gino Guidugli knows it. I don't really know him that well. I would assume he does because he played college football. He played quarterback. He was a multi-year starter at Cincinnati. So if I know it, you know they know it. And at some point in time, you got to ask yourself, why didn't he get the job this past year? Why didn't they turn to him when Riley was clearly hurt? Why didn't they turn to him when Riley wasn't playing well? There's got to be a reason why. And it's not because any of us hate Steve. It's because we're evaluating what we see. And we're taking proper, because if all you're looking for is the things he does well, then you're going to be blinded to the fact that he has limitations. If you're a CJ or Kenny guy and all you do is ignore the good things that Steve does, and it's got a long release, he takes a lot of sacks, and you're not willing to give him credit for the other things, then you're also blinded to why he's in this competition. There has to be a fair evaluation of all the quarterbacks. And again, there's a reason that we're not going into this battle with Steve being the clear cut. Of course he's going to be the quarterback. And why he wasn't the quarterback last year, because I'm not the only one that sees this. And you can love Steve to death, and I hope you do, because he's an awesome kid. But he's going to have to improve upon those limitations if he's going to win this battle. And if the Notre Dame offense is going to be good enough for them to go out there and compete for a championship.
So moving down the line here, Bryan, Kenny Minchey, and we're sticking with the theme of just seniority in the room, who's been around the program, and Kenny Minchey's next in line. And he's the second guy. He's the second quarterback that is involved in this competition. For me, I haven't seen a whole lot of Kenny. I mean, I started with Irish Breakdown in the fall, haven't been able to go up to a spring practice or anything like that, but from the sample sizes that I have personally seen in different clips that have came out, in the sample size of the Blue Gold game, lots alike, handful of improvements. So, Bryan, when you look at Kenny Minchey and where he's at in this competition, where do you kind of break down, or what are your breakdowns of the things that give him an advantage in this competition and areas that he has to improve upon?
Well, the first thing is we talk a lot about things as being different. You can look at something and be like, that's different. When Kenny throws the football, you're like, that's what it's supposed to look like right there. That's a thing of beauty. I mean, he can power the ball. He's got touch. I mean, we saw it in the spring game. He threw a couple really nice deep balls, one for a touchdown to Micah Gilbert over top of Micah Bell. We've seen that. He developed. What's funny is he was not really that much of a runner in high school. Kenny didn't really run a ton in high school. He would scramble every now and then, but he really wasn't much of a runner in high school. He was athletic, but when Kenny would get out of the pocket in high school, he was looking to throw. And I love that about him. His junior year, he rushed for 3 touchdowns and 150 to 137 yards. That's all he did, because he was, when he would get out of the pocket, you'd see him, his eyes are downfield. He's hitting guys on the run. He throws a really nice ball on the run. He sort of developed that in college. And we saw like what we saw last spring, and then the touchdown run he had against Purdue. That wasn't really there in high school. He was an athlete, but he wasn't a runner. And that's who he is. I mean, he's still a guy that's going to sit back, and when Kenny is really hurting you, it's sitting back in the pocket, reading the defense, and getting the ball out in really impressive fashion. He gets good zip on the ball. He's got a really compact release. He's a guy that's a quality athlete. And we've heard since he was in high school that he's a really smart guy. I talked to a Notre Dame coach when they were recruiting him, and he was like, look, this is one of the smartest kids I've ever recruited at quarterback. Now, they also would say that about CJ. Like, that's something that they've been looking for in quarterbacks, is they want guys that can really show that high football IQ, and Kenny is part of that. And we heard people at the Elite 11 rave about how you get him on the board, and he was the most impressive quarterback we had, just breaking down coverages and all that kind of stuff. So he's a really smart kid. It's got to now turn into that smartness results in better decision-making, because the flip side of that is Kenny is very inconsistent with his technique. His feet get him into a lot of bad spots, and his feet often what lead to him making some rush throws. The interception he threw in the spring game was just kind of that inexcusable, bro, that's an awful throw. Like, I don't mind you getting picked because you tried to make it throw. That's just, I'm bailing and I'm just throwing the ball down the field. Can't make that kind of mistake. And what we learned about CJ, or about Steve also, Trev, in the spring game and the Jersey scrimmage, he's a slow starter. Now, once he gets going, he will rip you apart. But to be the starter, he's got to be better, like right out of the gate. And I don't know what it is that kind of has him be that way, but he's gonna have to work on that. So being really tighter with his technique and not allowing his feet to get him into some bad positions, and then just being a little bit better decision maker when he's getting pressured. That's when Kenny kind of makes some bad decisions. He doesn't respond well to the pressure of and when I mean pressure, I'm talking about like the defense pressuring him, not like the pressure of the moment. Kenny's a pretty smart, calm kid as well. But that's really going to be the big thing is if he's going to beat out Steve and CJ, that decision-making has to improve, and the conversation needs to be about, did you see that throw? Did you see that run? Like, this kid is a playmaker, and he's coming out. He's starting fast, first team period. He's doing this, he's doing that, and he looks really good. That consistency of execution is really when you see from Kenny. And one of the big things that I've heard about Kenny is there's questions about, does he really have that burning fire inside to be great? There's some that question that. Like, I think he wants to be great, but like, is it really like a fuel that burns inside of him? If the answer to that this offseason is yes, Kenny absolutely has a chance to win the starting job. If it's not, he won't win it, because I know that Steve and CJ have that. And not all quarterbacks have that. There's been other guys that have. I didn't think Deshaun Kaiser had that. I just didn't. There's been guys like that, and if Ken, and sometimes it's because like I'm not the starter, so I can't turn it on like that. But when it's my turn, I'm that guy. But when it's just when he's on, Trev, I mean he throws some gorgeous balls, man. I mean he's also really good. Him and CJ both, but Kenny is really good at knowing how to throw guys open. Especially in high school, we saw that a lot. There's times where, I saw him one time and he can change arm angles really effectively, where he was dropping back to throw and there was an over route coming to his right, and he just kind of dropped his elbow down and slung that ball, because the elbow drop created the ball to kind of get up and down a little bit. Because if you throw a ball like this and you try to get over a linebacker, sometimes it won't come back down. But sometimes when you kind of sidearm it, it'll kind of go up and come back down with a little bit of a different angle. And he drops that sucker right over top of a linebacker and hits the runner on the over route, just boom, on stride, and he just takes off running. You're just like, dude, that is a freaking dime. And he did that as a junior in high school. So, I mean, he's got that ability to make some anticipatory throws where it's like, and the thing about that, and I talked about this when we broke his film down, when I first saw that, I saw the behind the quarterback angle. I didn't see the receiver. I'm like, who the heck is he throwing that ball to? Because when I break down film, the first thing is I'll just let the whole film go. I'll just watch it. And then I go back and rewind and all that. I'm like, who's he throwing to? And then all of a sudden you see this receiver come out of nowhere, just boom, hits him right on the run. You're like, oh, wow, that's impressive. And Kenny's got that kind of ability when he's on. The problem is Kenny just tends to run a little hot and cold. And when you're in a competition against guys like Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, you can't run hot and cold. But when he's hot, he's as good as anybody in the room.
We saw a little bit of it in the blue gold game. I mean, it was honestly a tale of two different halves from Kenny Minchey. Between the first half, he was almost a little bit too unsure of himself. The game looked to be a little bit too fast for him in the first half. And then he settled in the second half. And to your point, Brian, he started dicing up the defense. Some of it could be just not inability to perform in the moment. I don't think any of the quarterbacks on this roster, the moment will be too big being a starting quarterback at Notre Dame. But I think it's just call it jitters, nerves maybe. But that's something that Notre Dame can't have at quarterback in 2024 or in 2025, because we saw that in 24. There was a lot of times with Riley, love everything that he did for this team. But there were times where, to your point, against Florida State, you saw early, it's like, all right, he just doesn't have it today or right now. In the first half against Penn State, in the first half against Ohio State, it's like, okay, he's just not seeing the field right now. But once he gets into a rhythm, you start to see, oh, okay, that's the Riley Leonard that we remember seeing at Duke in 22. That's the Riley Leonard we've seen at times against Army and against Navy and at times against Stanford and at times against Louisville. So that's going to be something that Kenny's going to have to work through. But like I said before at the start, in the small sample size that I've seen him really rip it, I know exactly what you mean when you talk about things are a little different. I mean, I go to a lot of games and I see in warmups the differences when that ball comes out in Nate's hands. Yeah. Anything else to add on Kenny before we?
Yeah, I just think that you brought up Riley Leonard in 2022, and I think that's actually a really good comp for Kenny in a lot of ways because Riley could change arm angles a lot. Riley showed really good anticipatory ability that year. Kenny is a lot like Riley was that year as a thrower, not as a runner. Riley's a different cat. There's no one on the roster, not even Anthony Rizak or, like unless they move Tyler Buckner back to quarterback, there's nobody on the roster at quarterback that has Riley's running ability. Just like get that out of your system. They're not going to run like that next year. But Kenny has a little bit of that gunslinger to him that Riley had in 2022, where he'll drop that arm down and get the ball out, lead it, drop it down so he can get it out over top of a guy. And he's got a little bit of that gunslinger, except for Kenny's a little bit more naturally accurate than Riley was. And he's got a little bit stronger arm than Riley had at that time. Now, where Riley was better is Riley, because he was so much more dynamic athletically, could kind of not go with a read and then just take off and run and make a big play. Kenny can do that to a degree, but you really need Kenny to be more comfortable making those type of throws. That's the point. And that's what he's going to have to get to, is that consistency. Be the gunslinger, but be a better decision-making version of that gunslinger. Don't force that ball over the middle when there's literally no one open. And if Luke Talmadge didn't pick it off, if I remember correctly, there was another defender there that was going to pick it off. Like somebody was picking that ball off because he just kind of chucked it. Can't make those kind of mistakes when you're now battling for the quarterback job and you're going into year 3. But I think Kenny, there's some people that take it real personally when Kenny's name isn't mentioned in a quarterback battle. And he is a little bit of that middle child, where it's like the older child gets a lot of the attention because he's older and he's this and he's that. And so, he's the firstborn and all that kind of stuff. And that's Steve. And then there's the baby, there's the last one. There's the one that needs the most attention because he's the youngest and he's the baby. And then there's the middle child that's kind of like, what about me? And that's kind of who Kenny is. But make no mistake. Thank you. Make no mistake. Kenny is in this competition. He has a shot to win this job, and it wouldn't be a shocker if he won it. It just is going to take him to kind of show that fire that answers the coach's questions about how bad do you want this. And it doesn't mean being rah-rah. It just means playing with a little bit of an edge, doing certain things that make me say, okay, this guy really wants to be great. And it just requires being more consistent in his approach and his footwork. And if he does that and just that's what's going to make him a faster starter, right? It's not like stop being such a slow starter. Those are the reasons why he's not a fast starter. And if you do those, he's going to be in this conversation. And I was an older child, I'm just, I had a babysitter. We were treated differently, fairly, loved by both, but you're going to treat the older child different than the middle one. And as fans, that's kind of where Kenny's caught himself, right? I can be honest about that, but trust me, there's a lot of people that think Kenny Minchey's got a shot to win this job, including some people in the Notre Dame coach's office. They just need to see him do certain things. So that's my 2 cents on Kenny.
The final player, Bryan, in this conversation is the baby. It's the youngest one. It's CJ Carr. And he redshirted this past season. He's going into 2025 as a redshirt freshman. And he has arguably the highest ceiling of the guys in this room. Now, with that being said, he is also the youngest, like we highlighted. So there are question marks about him being the youngest guy in that room and the experience that he brings to the table. So when you start breaking down CJ Carr and what he means to this quarterback competition, and we start talking about ceilings and floors, the pros and cons he brings to this quarterback battle, Bryan, let's hear it.
Here's the thing about CJ. There just aren't as many cons other than experience and can he stay healthy? And that's true for, he's got impeccable mechanics. He's got an incredible football mind. He's a good athlete. He throws, between him and Kenny on who throws the best ball, I think it's CJ. It's like he missed like a month of the season, he was like, working back and he wasn't 100%. He goes into a 7-on-7 and he's still not 100% as far as volume. And people are like, well, he's not doing as much. He's only taking half the reps in during individual. And then they go to a 7-on-7 period. And CJ steps in there and he takes the ball and he just drills a 15-yard in cut right in the gut between two guys. Hits the receiver right in the gut, like perfect ball placement. Very next play, he throws a deep over route over top of, I think it was Jack Kaiser, right in front of a Don Schuler. I think it maybe Xavier Watts. And you're just like, did he literally just complete a 25-yard over route to a walk-on receiver against the best pass defense in college football? Like it was nothing. And you're just like, that's ridiculous. And just some of the throws he makes, you're just like, other guys can't make that throw. And it's like something simple, like KK Smith ran a little 10-yard outcut in the blue gold game. And there was a flat defender standing right in front between him and CJ. And you're just like, no quarterback on the planet is going to think that's the right read. And any quarterback that makes that throw is going to probably get picked off because you don't think he sees it. And CJ literally throws the ball over top of the guy and just drops it right on the sideline to KK. And you're just like, I don't know that I've seen a quarterback at Notre Dame attempt that throw with that against that coverage, much less complete it for a 10-yard gain. And that's the thing. Like the only critiques you have of CJ are experience. He's got to get stronger, right? So he can take the pounding and just, okay, he's got elite arm talent. He doesn't have a cannon for an arm. He's not going to drop back and throw it 65 yards and over the top of the defense. I mean, he's not that. But it's just all the other tools are there. I mean, there's a reason that everybody that I talk to within the program is just like, I was talking to a dad of a defensive recruit that signed with Notre Dame. Just in the middle of his recruitment. He hadn't committed to Notre Dame yet. We're just talking about his visit to Notre Dame over the spring. And he's like, we're not even talking about the offense. He goes, hey, man, I got to talk about this number 12, CJ Carr. I'm like, all right. I'm like, where's this going? He goes, and this is a guy that played college football. He's like, I've ever seen anybody throw a football like that. That guy's different. That guy's special. No bias. Doesn't know. I don't even think he knew that was Lloyd Carr's grandson. He's just like, I was at practice and I played college football and my son's been on a lot of visits to a lot of big time schools and I've never seen anybody throw the football like that guy does. That's just the reality. It's not a knock on Kenny. It's not a knock on Steve. It's just, you look for flaws and you're just like, okay, his arm's not as strong as Brett Favre's and, he's not as big as Josh Allen and, he's not going to run for 1,000 yards. It's like, I mean, you can nitpick and find things, but you're just like, dude, sit back watching him throw the ball. You're just like, that is just a thing of beauty. It's like I'm watching Picasso paint. It's like I'm watching Da Vinci, carve something. I'm just watching a master at work as a thrower. Now, can he read defenses at an elite level when the pressures? I mean, those things we don't know. We know what he can do in a blue gold game. We know what he can do in the jersey scrimmage. We know what he can do in practice, but can he do it in front of 100,000 people? That's the big knock on CJ. We don't know. Maybe he's just a great 7-on-7 guy. Maybe he's a great practice player and he's just not a great game player. We don't know the answer to that. But all I know is, man, I was in high school the same time Ronald Curry and Michael Vick were, and we were from the same area, and they were a year behind me. I saw those guys play. I saw Jimmy Clausen throw live. I saw Everett Golson throw live. I've seen Andrew Luck throw live. I've seen Trevor Lawrence throw live. I've seen Jameis Winston throw live. I've seen a lot of really good – I've seen Mac Jones. Well, actually, I wasn't actually at that game. Against Alabama, but I have seen some big-time quarterbacks, number one picks live in person, watching them in pregame, watching them in the game right there in the stadium, and I don't know that I've seen a guy that just throws the ball consistently, is just pretty and as accurately and is just like, dang, as CJ. The number's small. I mean, you watch Andrew Luck throw and you're like, dude, that's different. You watch Jimmy Clausen throw, you're like, this guy could just paint a masterpiece. He doesn't have the arm that some other guys, but this guy could put the ball wherever he wants to put it. I mean, that's the reality of it. Now, can he do it and read a defense and with pressure in his face? Those are the things we got to find out. We haven't seen that yet. I have never seen CJ Carr throw a pass without a red jersey on in college. It's a different animal. But people talk about why are you so high on CJ? It's that right there. It's that right there. That's what I've seen. I've seen guys with stronger arms. I've seen bigger guys. I've seen more athletic guys. That kid throws a pretty football. And people say, Well, you're just hyped up on him because he's Lloyd Carr's grandson. I could give two rips who his grandfather is. I could give two rips who his father is. I care about how he plays. Right? Otherwise, I'd have been like, hey, let's go Nate Montana. You know what I mean? I don't care. I care about what he does.
That is a name I've not heard in a minute.
Right.
In a minute.
So that's kind of that's why I graded him as a 5-star. It's because of what you see on film. It's what you see when you see him throw in person. It's what I saw at Irish Invasion. It's just like this guy's just out there painting masterpieces. Now the next part is what we got to find out now is, can he do that when there's 11 dudes on the other side of the field that are allowed to hit him? They're allowed to mix up coverages. You're not off of a script. Can he run an offense that way? That's the big unknown with CJ Carr. And that's what he's going to have to go out and prove in a lot of these game situations and practice situations in the spring. That's where it's at. And then he's got to get stronger. That's the key.
There's things that I saw of him in the blue gold game that I really liked for his age. And I would have liked it if he was a senior as well, but I think his youth in the program, I think, amplified how impressive it was to me. Whenever he broke the pocket, eyes remained downfield. And that might sound simple to some, but you've seen other quarterbacks who've started multiple years in college fail to do that. It's little things. It's maneuvering around in the pocket. Both hands were on the ball the entire time. Josh Allen, for the Buffalo Bills, had trouble with that, and he was a professional.
Yeah, but he can make up for it with a lot of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But
I'm it's little things. This ball 70 yards, like it's nothing. In the wind.
I'm going to jump over a middle
against
linebacker
the wind and snow.
I know it, man. But it's little things like that you see. And I remember watching the blue gold game with my dad, and I was talking to him. I was like, man, I haven't seen a quarterback be able to do some of those things in a second, right?
At Notre Dame. Right.
Yeah, yes. And so for me, it's really promising. All the conversations you hear about the ceiling and the potential and the arm strength, I love hearing all those things. But for me, it's some of the more impressive things is where he was at maturation-wise was a lot farther along than an early enrollee freshman. And that for me is something, because that's another thing that I don't think people remember is when CJ played in the spring game, he was an early enrollee, similar to what Steve was when he played in the spring game back in 22. He was supposed to be getting ready for his senior year high school prom, so that's, for me, it's really promising things. But to Brian's point, it's hard to come up with cons for a guy where it's just kind of like, okay, we haven't seen him do it. But that con is also the same for all three of the guys, really. Yeah. We've seen it a little
less
with Steve.
Less with because you can say playing against Oregon State's not the same as playing against Ohio State. But I've still seen him against a Power 4, Power 5 football team in a game where if you lose, it counts on your stat sheet. If you win, it counts on your stat sheet. We've seen him go in to the Orange Bowl, and yes, he took too many check down, but that's what he needed to do to move the offense down there. And there were some throws that he could have made. I mean, I talked about the if he hits Eli Raridan on that little wide hitch throw, I think it was 2 plays before he got the second sack, Eli might score. I mean, but again, he's a guy coming off the bench cold. I don't expect him to be perfect. I mean, those were things that if he was in the flow of the game, maybe he would have seen that type of thing. But you still saw the poise. You saw him handle the pressure. You saw him bounce back from getting sacked. I don't know if CJ or Kenny would fold in that moment once they got sacked. And in that type of moment, they may panic and now they're looking for the pressure. Steve was like, all right, I got sacked. Okay, great job getting the ball back, guys. I'm going to drop back and I'm not going to be any different. We know that about him. We don't know that about those other two guys. And so, there's a lot of things he needs to do better from a reading and all this. But I know one thing, the moment will not be too big for Steve Angeli because we've seen it. We haven't seen that with those other two guys.
Brian, any closing thoughts on the quarterback battle as a whole, these three guys, before we get to the super chat that we have?
Man, it's just going to be a great battle. And you feel like as long, and here's my takeaway, and I hope that we all, us fans, understand this. You just got done hearing me just sing the praises of CJ Carr. And again, I have seen a lot. I've covered 6 or 7 Army All-American games and Under Armour All-American games and all these things. And I just got done singing his praises. But here's what I'll tell you. If it's a fair competition, I don't care who the starter is, because I think all these kids have a chance to win a lot of football games in Notre Dame. As long as it's a fair competition and the player that wins the job is the guy that earned the job based off how he performed, not you're the oldest, you're the most athletic, or even you're the most talented. Because CJ Carr having that kind of arm talent at 7-on-7 events and high school games and during pregame and things like that is a whole lot different than making those throws when you've got Ohio State's defensive line bearing down on you or Georgia's defensive line bearing down on you. Like if he can't show that he can handle it in those moments, then he's not going to be the guy. The point is as long as it's a fair competition and the player that earns it with his performance is the guy that starts, they're going to be really good at quarterback next year. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen against, I mean, maybe it does, but don't expect it to be he goes out there, whoever it is, and throws for 3 bills and both against Miami and Texas A&M. Matter of fact, I hope that doesn't happen, because if that does happen and Notre Dame starts off 2-0 with 2 blowouts in the quarterback, then the pressure on that kid for the rest of the year is going to be nuts. Right? Win the game, manage the offense, do whatever. They're probably not going to look like the second coming of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, John Elway, or Aaron Rodgers, or whoever in their first month of the season. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to do this. If you're a fan of somebody else, don't then look for everything to be wrong with that guy in the first couple games. And I think if there's an honest competition and they pick the right guy based off how he performs, not by arbitrary things like experience or recruiting ranking or whatever else, who has the best hair or whatever, I think most people will be able to accept who that winner is and rally behind him. Because what we should all be able to come to the conclusion of, these are all 3 talented football players. Is their talent to varying degrees? I believe so. But if Kenny wins the job, man, you got a kid back there that can spin it. And he's got great hair, and he's athletic. But, man, he can spin it. He's smart. He can read a defense, and he's earned that job. And Notre Dame's going to be really good. If Steve Angeli's good enough to beat out CJ and Kenny in a fair fight, then guess what? Maybe he's better than I thought he was. And then we'll get a chance to see him go prove that. And if CJ does the same thing, it's like, you know what? Let's roll. But that's what I'm excited about, is I hope that one of those 3 really seizes the job, because whoever does truly seize the job in a fair fight is going to get you excited about what this team can be next year. Because and especially going into 2026 when that guy's got a year under his belt. But now in the 16-game season, you start thinking about where this guy might be in November against the competition they're going to face in November, and you start getting a little bit fired up about what this offense is going to look like, because they still have Jeremiah Love. They still have Jadarian Price. I think the offensive line is going to be really good next year. And that's where you get fired up, man. You start saying, like, boy, hey, you know what? This could get good. If the quarterback steps up, this team could be really good next year with him being a good leader of the offense. And then in 2026, when that guy's got a year under his belt, then you're like, right?
Yeah.
Start getting excited, because there's a lot of talent there. And then Blake Hebert's going to be in that, you know what I mean? And then you get Noah Grubbs coming in. Like, the present and future at quarterback at Notre Dame is as good as healthy as it's been in a decade. That coaching staff did not properly develop that room. Part of it was not their fault. Brian Kelly is not to blame for Everett Golson making the decision he made to get suspended in 2013. I don't fault Brian Kelly for that. But there's a lot of things that the staff did to not develop the room properly, where we never got the best of Everett, we never got the best of Malik, we never got the best of Deshaun, and we never got the best of Brandon. This staff has to make sure they don't do that. And I'm confident that they will. To what degree, we'll find out. But the depth and the talent in that room, it's not CJ or bust. It's not Kenny or bust. Steve or bust. like it's been a lot of years in the past. Like if Tyler Buckner doesn't step up in 2022 and win that starting job, you're like, uh-oh. Now it's like, I don't care. Whoever wins it, man. Whoever wins it, we're going to be in a good place. And it's going to be fun as long as they're developed properly. But and I guess isn't that kind of still a little bit of a lingering thing, Trevor, to what you said about earlier? It's like 3 of the last 4 years, it was like you're bringing in a guy that somebody else developed and you're just letting him run your offense. This is the first time that we're going to really find out, okay, Gino Guidugli, how good of a developer are you as a quarterbacks coach at Notre Dame? Hey, Coach Denbrock, like, great job getting, Jaden Daniels, who had been developed by somebody else for 2 years, and getting Riley Leonard, who'd been developed by somebody else for 3 years, and doing some good things with them. But can you take that raw ball of clay and turn it into a masterpiece? I think that's probably my final question. It's not really about the 3 kids, but it's more about the coaching staff. And I'm not saying they can't do it. It's just like anything else. It's an unknown because they haven't had the opportunity to do it or been in a position to do it. They've gone to the portal, and I think rightly so in the last 2 years. They should have gone to the portal. They rightly decided not to go to the portal this year. Now it's about, okay, now Gino, we've seen Deland McCullough earn his pay the last couple of years with how he's developed. We've seen Mike Mickens do that, Al Golden. And now it's like, okay, Gino, now you're in the spotlight. And how you develop your room is going to go a long way towards how the season goes. And who might be calling you next year trying to say, hey, man, you want to come call some plays for us? We saw what you did with that quarterback over there, and that's the opportunities that might present themselves. But that's my final concern is, and it's more so because we just haven't seen it from this group and the issues with the past. We've got to see if this group can do it. I'm confident they can, but we need to see it at Notre Dame. That's my final piece.
We share the same question mark around the coaching staff. And it's not that they lack the ability to, but we just spent an hour talking about the upside of all 3 of these quarterbacks in this competition, to where if one of them doesn't step up and perform the way that they are projected to, it'll start to raise a little bit of questions. I don't think that they don't have the ability to do it. It's just we haven't seen them have to. For me, the best storyline of this competition is there's going to be a great arc for whoever wins the job. If it's Steve, all things being a fair competition, he just beat out 2 really high ceiling kids. That's going to leave you feel really good. If it's Kenny, he beat out somebody that's going into his 4th year with the Notre Dame program and 2nd year with an offensive coordinator. The first time he's been able to say that in his career. And CJ Carr, a kid who has arguably the highest ceiling of all 3 of the guys. And if it's CJ Carr, a redshirt freshman just beat out a senior and a junior. All storylines point in the direction of somebody who is, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. That's
redshirt junior and redshirt sophomore, if we're going to say he's a redshirt freshman, but I'm just giving you a hard time. It's in Kenny's case, I think he's the guy that's considered least likely. Because if it's going to be an experienced guy, the conversation is it's going to be Steve. And if it's going to be a young guy, it's going to be CJ. And then Kenny's right in the middle, like, well, I'm not a veteran and I'm not young. I'm like kind of in that middle. And I think that's why some people don't view him as the most likely. But to your point, if he wins that job, buckle up, folks, because you're going to see some dimes get thrown next year. He's going to make some mistakes. So CJ, so Steve. They're not going to play like they're seasoned vets in games 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I'm telling you something right now. You're going to see some absolute dimes get thrown next year by all 3 of these quarterbacks. But I think a couple, maybe more than another. Just giving you my honest opinion. I'll change it if the data, if the what I see changes it. But man, if Kenny's the guy, he, like you said, he had to beat out the most experienced guy in the room, who's a great leader, incredibly well respected in the locker room, incredibly well respected by the coaching staff, and a 5-star talent behind him. I'm like, okay, that's going to be fun, because if Kenny beat those 2 guys out, and he's the least, like as a coach, he's the least guy you feel a need to push. You either feel the need to push the veteran because I want the experience, or you feel the need to push the young, big named, Lloyd Carr grandson. Kenny's like, what's the desire to push him? It's just because he went out and earned it. There's no extra thing that makes you think you should push Kenny. Again, it's kind of middle child type of thing, but that leads you to believe if Kenny wins the job, that means he took his game to a whole new level, and it's gonna be fun to watch. And if, like you said, if CJ does it, it's gonna be fun to. If Steve does it, you're just like, dude, it's gonna. I just hope that they make the decision for the right reasons. That's the big key. And that's the final thing that Marcus Freeman, one of the final things Marcus Freeman has to prove as a coach. Can you make the decision to go with a young, unproven guy who might make more mistakes, who might turn the ball over more than your veteran, because you're willing to look in the future and say, but once he works all that stuff out, or do you keep pushing that back? That's going to be the tough part for Marcus Freeman and the coaching staff. It's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. And if you are going to go with the young guy, let him be young. That's my, weather the storm a little bit. And when I mean weather the storm, I mean not if he goes out and just has an abysmal performance, it'll need addressed, right? But it can't be some of the offensive stories that we heard from early in the season this past year, and Marcus Freeman's coming out in the pregame and say he just needs to run the offense and not do anything too risky. And can't be that. Can't be that.
Right. Got to find that happy medium, letting him run the offense, knowing he's going to make mistakes, but don't beat him down so much for those that he's just afraid to try to do anything after that. We saw that under the previous coach. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean you accept the interception Kenny threw against in the scrimmage, the blue gold game. It doesn't mean you accept the pick that Steve threw against Stanford, or if CJ makes a similar, I haven't seen that throw, but it doesn't mean you accept it. It just means you don't crush him for it. And you correct it. You're like, come on, man, you got to be better than that, whatever. But understand that's going to kind of happen. So Trev, we did a super chat real quick before we get out of here. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop, joking kind of, but who does Urban Meyer, Luke Fickell know as a running back coach that Marcus Freeman will bring in on the staff? Hope all is well, IB and fellow Indy fans. I see what you did there. A lot of Luke Fickell and Urban Meyer trees. I don't think that he looks for Luke Fickell people. It's just a lot of the people that Luke Fickell hired or people that Marcus Freeman worked with. He coached with Mike Brown for 2 years at Cincinnati. He coached with Mike Denbrock for 4 years at Cincinnati. He coached with Gino Guidugli for, I think, 2 or 3 years at Cincinnati. It wasn't like he was like, "Hey, Luke Fickell, who do you have?" It's he knew those guys because he worked against them. And so the Urban Meyer thing, I feel you, but I think Marcus Freeman has an idea because he also interviewed some guys for this job 3 years ago, and I'm sure he'll have some other people in the business that have recommendations. But it's got to make a home run. That's the key. Got to make a home run. So, Trevor Trowbridge, my friend, that'll do it.
Well, thank you guys for being with us for the better half, about 2 hours, 40 minutes. It's weird. Coming off of a 5-hour show yesterday, I was like, man, it didn't feel like we went for that long, but we still almost did a 3-hour show today.
Almost, yeah. I'm like, dude, I'm going to have all this free time after this? Oh, nope.
Well, listen, great conversations today. And as always, all these conversations have been happening on the premium message boards. But before you guys get out of here, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family.
Got all my recruiting rankings and grades for the 25 class up on the board. I broke down and ranked the offensive class, broke down and ranked the defensive class. Also did my grades for the class on offense, my grades for the class on defense. You can find those at irishbreakdown.com, but also have them on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'm going to try to finish up here before I have to head to the small group we have at 6:30. I'm going to try to finish up my 2-year grades, where I put the 24 and 25 classes together on offense and then defense and grade them. Should have that up here soon as well. And you'll find all of that on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Chris H., I think it was Chris Sabo had some disagreements with some rankings. Chris, great place to have that chat is on the board. So just go into there, respond to it, tell me what you agree or disagree with, and we can have that conversation. That's what it's meant for. And to my guy, Spencer Kane, my dude, me disagreeing with you is not me thinking you're being disrespectful, buddy. I like engaging. I like dialogue. And I like responding to people who don't agree with me because that requires more of a conversation other than just thanks for agreeing with me. So don't take it that way. I love the debate. That's why I want to get more people on the board so we can have those conversations. And I do like hearing other people's opinions.
So until tomorrow, Bryan and I will be back here at 1 p.m. to do the Friday free-for-all mailbag, where we will address a lot of the questions after another crazy week of this offseason. I'm sure we will have a lot of really good submissions in tomorrow. But until tomorrow, that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.